At 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 12 noon and you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst and coming up for you this hour. Can he fix it? Yes, he can, says number 10. No, he can't, say the DUP and many of his own backbenchers. The political headache of Brexit, which did for Theresa May's premiership, now causing Rishi Sunak to reach for the aspirin bottle. He's trying to juggle the competing pressures over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Downing Street has been making approaches to Europe to move the process forward, but it sounded alarm bells in Stormont and on his own backbenchers. He's held a cabinet meeting this morning to try to sell his vision, but the Eurosceptic ERG group is now assessing what it looks like to them. It could mean yet more trouble for an embattled government. More with our political editor in Stormont. Is it all over for Kate Forbes before it's even begun? In an interview last night, the Scottish Finance Minister pressed on her views on same-sex marriage. It's left senior members of the SNP withdrawing their support for her. I'll be looking at First Minister Humza Yousaf as a shoo-in as First Minister. All the latest on that coming up from Edinburgh. And nothing to do with me. President Putin blames the destruction of Ukraine's towns on the West, saying they started it all. His own MPs looked on and listened to his 2-hour address in stony silence, apart from the usual applause. Joe Biden due to speak in Warsaw in a few hours' time, with what's likely to be a very different narrative in the battle of speeches, as the US ambassador is now summoned to Moscow. So get in touch with your views on all those top stories, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and of course we'll reflect your views a little later. First, latest headlines coming up with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 12. Russia has issued a warning to the West by suspending its participation in a nuclear arms treaty with the US. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major speech on the war in Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. He said sanctions, which were designed to make Russians suffer, have failed because the economy is stronger than Western powers anticipated. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it says is an aggressive course by Washington.
The Western elites do not conceal their goals. As they say, and it's a direct quote, to bring Russia a strategic defeat. What does it mean? What is it for us? It means to end us once and for all. It means they plan to turn a local conflict into a global confrontation. We understand it exactly like that. We will react to it accordingly. This is because, in this case, it is about the very existence of our country.
Senior Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia programme has this to say.
Russia stepping away from one of the few remaining arms control treaties, in this case regarding nuclear weapons, that actually kept the development of nuclear weapons on both sides under control. And again, the specific rationale that he has pointed to for doing this is the fact that the UK and France are not included in that. He's also said that Russia may resume nuclear testing. That too is an expected development, but he specifically ruled out that happening unless the United States starts first. So that is an interesting twist on things that we were thinking were going to happen.
Keir Giles speaking there, Senior Fellow at Chatham House. Now, the Prime Minister's under pressure as speculation mounts over a possible deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's suggestion Rishi Sunak could be facing a rebellion and possible resignations if Northern Ireland's place in the Union is put at risk. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is due to hold in-person talks this week with the EU's Maros Šefčovič after what was described as a productive video discussion. Earlier, Under Secretary of State Maria Caulfield told us the Prime Minister is determined to resolve the issue.
Our priority is trying to get this right for the people of Northern Ireland. And, you know, the Prime Minister has met with the DUP, for example, who are happy with elements of it. And, you know, the work now is to try and get those negotiations to a place where we can get an agreement on this and can make progress.
Shadow Environment Secretary Jim McMahon told GB News that Conservatives need to put national interests first.
There is no point in having an agreement that doesn't work in practice, that doesn't allow the trade of goods across the border. We need to make sure that those are in place and it can be workable in practice. And so far, all we hear from the government isn't the practicalities of how it will work. We just hear the squabbling taking place in this place where the Conservatives are in their own internal disputes instead of looking at the national interest. And what Labour's saying is it's time to put the country first, have an agreement, of course, that can work in practice and get it through so that the people of Northern Ireland have stability.
The Turkey-Syria border has been hit by another earthquake. It comes just 2 weeks after huge tremors rocked the region, killing more than 47,000 people. The latest quake of magnitude 6.4 has killed at least 6 people. Almost 300 others were injured. Founder of the Global Relief Trust, Shahida Rahman, says people are still shaken by the previous earthquake.
Tonight, in several cities, not only in Hatay, but also in neighboring cities such as Adana and Gaziantep, people rush to the oil stations to get petrol and gas to their cars, and they slept in their cars, or some of them even try to drive to outskirts of the cities or to other regions, safer regions, and aftershocks are still ongoing, unfortunately, in the region, and the trauma is still going on.
This is GB News. That's it from me for now. I'll be back shortly. Now it's over to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So that never-ending row over Brexit is back with a vengeance, it seems. A Tory Prime Minister trying to get a deal past his own MPs and the DUP with threats of ministerial resignations. You could be forgiven for thinking we're back in 2019. But this time, of course, it's Rishi Sunak, not Theresa May, in the firing line. Well, hopes appear to be fading for an imminent deal to break the deadlock over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Indeed, let's just update you what the Prime Minister's spokesman has said in the past few minutes. Apparently, the Prime Minister telling his cabinet that intensive negotiations with the EU continue on resolving the issues with the way the protocol being enforced. In addition, we're being told Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, the Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris holding fresh video talks with the EU's Maros Šefčovič a little later. So the negotiations continue. However, we've also got news that the ERG, of course, the Eurosceptic group, will be meeting this afternoon, and we'll see what their reaction will be. Well, let's speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who joins us now from Belfast. Darren, this is clearly moving still, even though Number 10 taking pains to say, look, still no deal in the offing.
It's really fascinating, that, isn't it? You're right to be saying that it's moving, but rather glacially. In fact, to the point where it's looking increasingly unlikely we're going to see any real significant progress, or at least the sign of any deal, I think, this week. There had been an expectation it could have come as early as yesterday, certainly today. That now seems less likely. But strangely, I think there almost certainly is a deal there. It's trying, Rishi Sunak's what's trying to do is trying to get the ERG and the DUP on side. That's what's proving difficult, rather than necessarily those negotiations with the EU Commission, though they are continuing. As you said, it was discussed at Cabinet this morning with the Prime Minister insisting that he wanted to do three things. That was safeguard Northern Ireland's place within the Union, protecting the Good Friday Belfast Agreement in all its dimensions, and ensuring the free flow of trade within the UK. And so what we've seen over the last 24, 48 hours or so are those voices in the DUP making it clear that, yes, while they recognise progress has been made on trying to improve things here, it's not gone quite as far as they would like. That's then led the ERG, that kind of hardcore Brexiteer group, if you like, inside the Conservative Party, to say, well, hold on a second, Prime Minister, we're not prepared to support any deal, if it has not got the DUP on side. And so that's why the Prime Minister spent quite a lot of yesterday afternoon in the Commons, in Parliament, in his office, talking to lots of Conservative MPs to try and get them on side. And then on a parallel track alongside that, as you say, those talks with the EU continue to see if they can eke out any more concessions. James Cleverly, who essentially is the lead negotiator from our side, continued to talk to the Commission over Zoom this afternoon. We think in person a little later on this week. So all in all, as you say, lots and lots of moving parts, but at the moment, no sign of a dramatic breakthrough.
And what is the assessment there in Northern Ireland, or this line that the Times newspaper came up with at the weekend, that Rishi Sunak was willing to go ahead, as the phrase is used, with a UK-EU accord, even without the support of the DUP?
I think that's going to be incredibly difficult, and the reason I say that is because, in the end, yes, of course, they're trying to improve the problems on the Irish Sea border here. They're trying to make trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland a lot less frictionful, if you like. They want to make it frictionless as much as they can, while Northern Ireland, of course, remains inside the EU's customs union. But also what they really fundamentally want to do, Mark, is restore government here to Northern Ireland. You have to remember, Stormont has not sat for the best part of a year. We had teachers on strike, where I'm standing right now, at a rally about an hour ago. They don't really have anyone to negotiate with over pay. And in fact, the people they do negotiate with, civil servants, are talking about going on strike next month. And it's the Good Friday Agreement's 25th anniversary in a couple of months' time. Clearly the UK government want to see power steering restored here, and they know that is not going to happen unless the DUP agree to this deal. And that is why they are still fundamentally key to this process.
OK, Darren, thank you for that in Belfast. More from you, of course, as we get details of what was discussed in Cabinet and what the ERG, of course, discussed later. But let's now welcome to the studio former First Minister of Northern Ireland and, of course, GB News host as well, Arlene Foster. Arlene, thank you for your time, because it is moving to a degree. We had Jeffrey Donaldson, of course, the DUP, saying this is the big moment. This is perhaps when something's going to happen. And we are being told more video conference calls this afternoon. But Downing Street saying still long-lasting challenges. Intensive negotiations with the EU continue. But basically, we're not there yet, effectively.
Yes, and I think that was the outcome of the information sharing exercise last week when Rishi Sunak went to Belfast and he shared information. There was no text shared or anything like that, but I think he gave them a sense of where things were at. And after that meeting, you'll recall, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson came out and said, yes, there has been progress made, but that there was no real basis for a deal at that point. And I haven't heard anything further since then. I think what is quite interesting is that the same tactics, the same playbook is being used by this Prime Minister as was used by previous Prime Ministers. In other words, do the negotiations and then at the end we'll show it to the DUP and say, actually it meets all of your tests, without actually involving them up until that point with a view to actually getting it over the line in a proper way.
And Jacob Rees-Mogg saying much the same perhaps about the ERG group at Westminster, give them a fait accompli and hope that everyone then falls in line. However, one then actually looks at the sort of minutiae of what is being discussed with the EU. How far will they move on the issue of the single market, all those other issues that could bedevil the relationship between north and south of the border in Ireland?
Well, of course, there are simple ways to deal with those things. First of all, there's the trade negotiations, and then there's the constitutional issues that were confirmed by the Supreme Court just 2 weeks ago, actually.
Exactly,
in terms of the Act of Union and in terms of the Northern Ireland Act, which give voice to the Belfast Agreement. So the trade issues, they're talking about green and red lines, but even the green lanes will still have some checks involved in them. And it was interesting to hear a very senior haulier describe that as a red and a slightly pink line. So actually it wasn't a green line at all. So there does need to be more realism brought to these talks. That actually, why don't we go for dual recognition? In other words, if you're exporting into Europe, you have to abide by the European laws.
Right.
If you're exporting to the rest of the United Kingdom into GB, you abide by the United Kingdom laws. Of course, they're largely the same at the moment. And then that would solve some of these issues that are
Logistically, how would that work, though? Would that actually bung up the works because there'd be effectively two sets of paperwork they'd all have to complete?
Because I think exporters would decide, given the markets that they go into, which they would decide to abide by. There are other things that could be looked at, of course, alternative arrangements, including small business exemptions, using digital technology to deal with any so-called risk to the single market. Because, of course, the risk is very, very small, Mark. And this is the point. This is totally disproportionate. The laws that have been passed, the protocol, is totally disproportionate to the risk to the EU single market. And so the trade issues are there to be solved, but that doesn't deal with the other bigger
Exactly.
issues.
And has this been the problem, that the two have been within the same wrapper, if you like, which has really avoided any kind of movement on the issue of the customs checks? And if they are able, and perhaps this is what's going on in these video calls, to actually de-link, if you can use that phrase, the two issues, what of the political circumstances? Because we've got Brandon Lewis, former Northern Ireland Secretary, now talking about, 25 years on, perhaps changing the architecture of the Good Friday Agreement, talking, of course, about the growth of the Alliance Party politically in Northern Ireland, and that how that would affect the position of the DUP in moving things forward.
Well, I think he's talking about fundamental change to the Belfast Agreement because, of course, the Belfast Agreement was based on a balance between nationalism and unionism and the fact that if you're going to move forward, you need the consent of both sides of the community. What Brandon's talking about is going back to ground zero, and actually I think he would probably need a referendum to deal with all of those things that he's talking about. But isn't it interesting, Mark, that when unionism's in the majority, we have to power share, but when we're in a slight minority, it goes back to majority rule.
Right. Just going to interrupt you because I think we've got President Biden in Warsaw. The picture's just coming in. And, of course, he is meeting these leaders after this 2-hour-plus speech from President Putin, where he effectively has blamed the West for the position in Ukraine. But we're also being told that the US ambassador is being summoned to Moscow. Clearly is a ratcheting up of the diplomatic situation in terms of what Putin has also talked about, indicating a withdrawal perhaps from the nuclear treaties. So perhaps not saber-rattling, but certainly an indication that Putin is wanting to mix it up a little bit. But these scenes in Warsaw, just a day, of course, after he took that 10-hour train ride across the border into Ukraine to be seen with President Zelensky, and then making the 500 million, $500 million undertaking on more armaments, ammunition, howitzers, Javelin missiles, to underscore what Washington says is its determination to stay the course. Although many in Washington say, well, that may well change, of course, with a change in the presidency. But clearly this is a very visual message to the other members of NATO in Poland, just over the border from Ukraine. And certainly in terms of what President Duda has said Andrzej Duda of Poland, indicating that NATO really needs to be aware of the threat that Russia poses at the moment. Arlene is still with us here in the studio, and it seems that the diplomatic stakes are being raised pretty dramatically at the moment.
Certainly, when you look at what's in the Prime Minister's in-tray, it's a huge in-tray. I mean, we have here what's happening in Ukraine, of course, the anniversary coming up this Friday of the invasion. And obviously, President Biden wanting to look as if he is very much in the lead in all of this. And then the Prime Minister has all of the Northern Ireland Protocol issue to deal with as well, because he wants to get devolution back, rightly so, in Northern Ireland again. And the 25th anniversary, the 10th of April, is the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement. So there's a huge pressure on him on that as well.
And in terms of a Prime Minister's position, great to have successes on foreign policy.
Yes.
Not that you talk about Northern Ireland's foreign policy, but certainly away from Westminster, if he can come up with some legacy, that helps him perhaps towards a general election, as people are saying about Biden in Washington with his position in a race with the Republicans.
I thought it was very interesting when Nicola Sturgeon stepped down that some people were actually saying that Rishi Sunak had played a part in that by actually challenging the law on gender recognition, and that was the final pressure on her actually to step down. So people are looking for legacy issues for the Prime Minister, bearing in mind that he will have to go to the people in a general election in the not too distant future.
And the sort of Cold War echoes that people have talked about, that maybe we are entering a new Cold War period, given the fact that China is making some kind of movement towards a further rapprochement with Putin. Whether they'll supply armaments, of course, we don't know. But we are entering uncertain times, aren't we?
We are. I think the Chinese axis with Russia and Iran is very worrying. When you look at what's happening in terms of the Uyghurs, in terms of Taiwan, what's happening in Hong Kong, I understand there's some prosecutions happening there
yet again
at the moment. So there's a huge pressure there as well for the Prime Minister, and I don't underestimate that for one moment. People all, if you're in politics, you want the top job, but my goodness, it's a pressurised one.
Yeah. Looking at the sort of geopolitical situation now, a year on from what has happened in Ukraine, how do you see things playing out now in terms of what happens for our support particularly? Because clearly when we saw Zelensky coming to Westminster and those historic scenes in Westminster Hall, the message was, give us the planes. They're still not forthcoming, even though discussions, we understand, are going on behind the scenes. Can you see that softening in the months ahead?
Well, I thought it was interesting to see both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss in the chamber in the House of Commons last night, putting the pressure on the Prime Minister around fighter jets in relation to more armaments going to Ukraine. I think they have sensed that that is where the people are at this present moment in time. But my goodness, when we were in the studio last year talking about the run-up to the Ukrainian war, and people were saying, no, he's not going to do it, it would be madness, he'll not invade Ukraine. And here we are, 1 year later, still talking about that dreadful war that's going on and loss of life that's there.
But perhaps a lot of people surprised at Biden having got to where he is. He was seen, let's not forget, as a bit of a lame duck president because of, falling up the steps of Air Force One and so on. People have reassessed their position, and maybe Putin has had to do the same as well.
I think this is a clever move from Biden's advisors to get him to go to Kiev. I think the pictures alone will give so much comfort to Zelensky and indeed shore him up in terms of what he's looking to do in other parts of NATO. It'll certainly send a message to people here in the UK that there we are, President Biden is in Kiev, he is bringing more armaments to Ukraine, he is firmly putting his flag with President Zelensky. So there's a need for us to step up as well. And I'm sure the Defence Secretary of State, Ben Wallace, will be watching this today and thinking about his budget, which, of course, is coming up very soon as well.
And we've heard this phrase, hollowing out, that Ben Wallace himself has used. And yet again, another pressure on Rishi Sunak in terms of finding extra money for defence budgets. I know they've identified a surplus, I think, of 5.4 billion they suddenly found behind the back of the sofa at the moment. However, when we are talking about long-term commitment to supplying ammunition for Ukraine, they're going to have to reassess the figures pretty dramatically.
And, you know, the first duty of our government is defence.
Defence of the realm. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think some people forget that at times. And we do need to put our money into defence so that we can stand on the world stage. I'm a big supporter of Ben Wallace. I think he's done an amazing job. And I think that his plea for more finance into defence should be well heard. But of course, on the other side, we have all the pressures around, they haven't gone away, you know, the cost of living in terms of health. We see all the strikes going on right across the United Kingdom in terms of public funding for public services. So there's a lot of pressure on at the moment, but I think that if Rishi Sunak wants to again put his flag firmly in the Zelensky camp, then he will have to come up with his budget.
And where are you on the idea that, you know, defence of the realm, that actually means the front line is on that border between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, you see, that is something that they will have to, NATO will have to decide, because it does have ramifications, Mark, and we shouldn't shy away from that. If you go to the front line, then you are at war with Russia, and I think we need to be prepared for that as well.
And that, of course, was the concern about the fighter jets, that they would be seen as offensive weaponry rather than defensive.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. We are getting this sort of suggestion that the US ambassador is being summoned to the Kremlin. We wait further details on that. But, of course, we have got the suggestion, the speech that Putin's just made, that Russia will no longer participate in the nuclear arms treaty. I mean, there may well be more clarification of that in this diplomatic meeting. But bluster, do you think, or should we really now reassess the danger that Russia could pose in terms of its nuclear arsenal?
I think we need to reassess, particularly when you look at what's happening with Iran and nuclear weaponry as well. That is something that we should be very concerned about. And, of course, China's been saber-rattling around Taiwan recently as well. So there's huge concerns geopolitically at the moment. It's a very dangerous time.
Indeed.
And I think we need to very much take stock on that.
Well, the waves and smiles there from both Andrzej Duda and from Joe Biden, but clearly there may be frowns as they try to make sense of what Moscow is up to and the fact the US ambassador is being summoned to Moscow. But more historic scenes here in Warsaw with the presidential visit there. Arlene, thank you for that.
Thank you.
We went round the world and
I'm back again.
I'm back again, indeed. But we'll see what emerges, of course, on the issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
More on that. We'll get the latest after that cabinet meeting and find out what the ERG makes of it all as well. Coming up in a moment. Stay with us on GB News Live.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the family of Nicola Bulley say she can finally rest in peace after her body was recovered from the River Wyre. In a statement issued through Lancashire Police, the family also saying the press and the public must be held accountable for the false accusations and the vilification, as they said, of friends and loved ones doing the search for her. Let's get more now from Lancashire. The latest with our reporter, Theo Chikomba, who's there still. Theo, clearly it's a village and a family and friends in mourning now. So clearly they're trying to reassess what's happened in these recent weeks. But some anger, too, at the way that the whole thing has been portrayed by, of course, social media particularly, and mainstream media.
Yes, for weeks, members of the community here, close family members and friends were all rallying around here trying to see what was happening here, and they had posters standing in the middle of the main road in and around the village asking for any information. And as we heard on Sunday, there was a sighting of a body on the River Wyre, and the police were able to confirm yesterday that it was indeed the mother of two, Nicola Bulley. In that press conference we heard around 5:30 yesterday, they did say, we recognise the huge impact that Nicola's disappearance has had on her family and friends, but also the people of St Michael's. We would like to thank all of those who helped us during what has been a hugely complex and highly emotional investigation. Now, of course, this investigation gripped the nation, this community and beyond. Many people were coming here to support. There's a community centre just a few yards from here where people were going to get maps, to go on walking trails to see if they could find anything to help with the police's investigation. We also heard in a statement that the family provided to the police to read out, which did say, our family liaison officers have had to inform us of our worst fears today. We will never be able to comprehend what Nikki had gone through in her last moments, and that will never leave us. And they went also on to say, we will never forget Nikki. How could we? She was the centre of our world. She was the one who made our lives so special, and nothing will cast a shadow over her life. And of course, the community is getting to grips with what has been announced by the police, and now they are mourning, of course, over the Nicola Bulley, who was a mother, friend, sister and someone who meant a lot to people in this community.
Indeed, as they try to obviously come to terms with what's been happening, awful thing for everyone there. But Theo, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we'll update people as we get more from Lancashire Police. Also coming up, is it all over for Kate Forbes before it's even begun? The latest from Edinburgh as the race for the SNP leadership narrows even further, perhaps. But first, an update on the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. It's 12:30. Here are the headlines. Russia has issued a warning to the West by suspending its participation in a nuclear arms treaty with the US. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major speech on the war in Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. He said sanctions, which were designed to make Russians suffer, have failed because the economy is stronger than anticipated. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it calls an aggressive course by Washington. Well, it comes as the US President Joe Biden arrives in Warsaw for talks with his Polish counterpart, a day after his surprise visit to Kyiv. He's expected to discuss security and increasing NATO's presence in Poland before addressing the situation in Ukraine during a news conference this afternoon. The Prime Minister's under pressure as speculation mounts over a possible deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's suggestion Rishi Sunak could be facing a rebellion and possible resignations if Northern Ireland's place in the Union is put at risk. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, and the EU's Maros Sefcovic are due to hold in-person talks this week after what was described as a productive video discussion. The Turkey-Syria border has been hit by another earthquake 2 weeks after huge tremors rocked the region, killing more than 47,000 people. The latest quake of magnitude 6.4 has claimed at least 6 lives. Almost 300 people have been injured. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, is Kate Forbes' bid for the leadership of the SNP already in trouble just a day after officially announcing her candidacy? Well, not according to her. She said her campaign for the leadership very much alive. However, key backers have announced they can no longer support the Finance Secretary, who said she would have voted against legislation on same-sex unions. Just to remind you, I think 2014 that occurred in terms of Holyrood passing the legislation. Well, she is one of 3 confirmed candidates for the contest, alongside Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan. Let's get the latest now from Edinburgh with our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, she then went public after that interview to say she regretted the pain or hurt caused by her comments, but I guess many others in the SNP are trying to assess if the damage has already been done.
Yes, well, certainly, as you mentioned there, 3 key backers have pulled out, within 24 hours of her launching her campaign, and she seems to have really put herself up against it before the race is even won. Of course, SNP MSPs are able to put themselves forward by Friday, the end of this week, to put themselves into the leadership race. But it's such a bizarre situation. Certainly this bill obviously was passed in 2014. Let's see, SNP MP Hannah Burdell, so even reaching down in Westminster, she took to Twitter about saying how this caused so much pain and hurt for her LGBT friends. And certainly, as you said there, Ruth Davidson, quite a prominent and one of 2 in recent times LGBT party leaders in Scotland. She said that, she's pretty sure that with this, Kate Forbes has just set fire to her own leadership campaign before it's even begun. So quite a lot of condemnation coming up from across the border here.
Yeah, and of course, one reflects, of course, that Kate Forbes talking about a matter of conscience, because she is a member of the Free Church of Scotland, and perhaps people talking about a political naivety, that maybe she should have taken that on board when she declared her candidacy.
Yes, well, certainly. I think it was a known quantity back then, you know, and a lot of people have pointed out that this could actually make the leadership race take a bit of a dark turn, you know. Certainly to my knowledge, Humza Yousaf hasn't been quizzed about his religion and how, you know, that would impact on his policy making. But, you know, you said at the top there that, you know, she regrets the pain that she's caused, but she's repeated herself on her stance on gay marriage on 2 occasions. And certainly I think on Sky News earlier on, she said that she didn't support other parts of LGBT rights that Scotland and the UK as a whole has worked on in recent years. Certainly I think that she has set her line in the stand. She defended it earlier on to say that, you know, there was a longing for politicians to answer straight questions with straight answers. And I think a lot of people are maybe wondering whether she took the word straight in that a little too literally.
Indeed. Tony, thank you very much indeed for that outside Holyrood there. But let's now speak to the political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, who joins us, Michael Blackley. Michael, thank you for your time. I think Kate Forbes has also said that her campaign is absolutely not over, despite the backlash. But others, even within the party, may have a different assessment now.
Well, she said that it's not over. There's no doubt that this leadership campaign has exploded into life with some of the comments that Kate Forbes has made about same-sex marriage. She is, as you just heard, she's defending her comments today. She's insisting that people that have Christian faith should be able to hold public office and talk about their views. But she has suffered a bit of a blow with the loss of a series of SNP politicians who were previously backing her. So the question is whether the SNP membership are satisfied with these socially conservative views that she has, or if this is something that really concerns some of those SNP members.
And just the assessment of where it leaves now, particularly Humza Yousaf, in terms of the candidacy. I mean, suggestions maybe that he now is home and dry to a degree. But, of course, he's previously promised to stand by the controversial gender recognition reform bill and to challenge the Section 35 order from the UK government. So it could be a return to the Nicola Sturgeon position with him.
Yes, I think Humza Yousaf is certainly the SNP establishment candidate. You've already seen a lot of the ministers that have served under Nicola Sturgeon rallying behind Humza Yousaf. I think he is the choice of the party hierarchy of the party HQ, and that makes him very much the front runner, because if the SNP membership have been supportive of Nicola Sturgeon's leadership and they get the impression that Nicola Sturgeon's leadership wants Humza Yousaf to succeed her, then I think that's a strong starting point for Humza Yousaf. Kate Forbes, I wouldn't entirely rule her out yet, but certainly she is off to a faltering start. We haven't heard much at all from the third candidate, the only candidate that's not a current minister after she resigned over the GRR bill. Ash Regan is going to launch her campaign later this week, and I think some of the people in her campaign are pretty happy that she's remaining fairly quiet at the moment, leaving Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes to dominate at the moment before launching that campaign on Friday. Okay. You never know; she might be a bit of a dark horse and get some of the membership on her side, especially amongst the independence fundamentalists in the SNP.
Yeah, keep her powder dry. But, I mean, would it be fair to say that perhaps Kate Forbes was the candidate certainly the Scottish Tory party feared most, and they may be quite relieved to see Humza Yousaf as coming back in as a front runner?
I think there's certainly a lot in that. Kate Forbes is the sort of candidate that could maybe reach across the political divide and reach out to people in the centre ground in a way that perhaps Nicola Sturgeon hasn't. For the Conservatives and indeed for Labour as well, I think Humza Yousaf is actually probably who they desperately want to win this contest, because they have both tried to portray him as incompetent minister in his time as Health Secretary. They've capitalised on gaffes and errors throughout his ministerial reign, really, in health, justice and transport. And I think they'll be rubbing their hands with glee at the prospect of him becoming the next First Minister, because they think that he'll not be able to hold together the SNP at all in the way that Nicola Sturgeon has.
OK, Michael, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll see what emerges in terms of the SNP and the leadership race as it continues for the moment. Thank you very much indeed. But let's head from the politics of Scotland to the politics back in Westminster and, of course, Europe, because Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been chairing Cabinet this morning amid these reports of the growing tensions within his party over the Northern Ireland Protocol, and the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, already declaring that this is the moment. That's what Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said. Eurosceptic ERG group of Tory MPs due to meet this afternoon. So is this another crisis, an existential Brexit crisis, if you like, for the Tory party? Let's now cross to Westminster and our political reporter, Olivia Utley. And Olivia, we've got some indications of what was discussed at Cabinet, with the Prime Minister talking of intensive negotiations with the EU continuing on resolving issues with the way that the protocol is being enforced, which doesn't really tell us an awful lot, I guess, of where we are.
No, it does sound like it was quite a tense cabinet meeting. So the situation we're in at the moment is the DUP, and with the help of the ERG, is refusing to accept the terms of the deal as it is so far. The DUP has two issues with the deal. One is the number of customs checks on goods coming out of Northern Ireland and back into mainland Britain. They are happy about the fact that customs checks would be essentially dropped on goods going from Britain into Northern Ireland, but the other way round, there's still an issue there. And the other issue is the continued jurisdiction of the European Courts of Justice over affairs that are happening in Northern Ireland, which the DUP feel is as though Northern Ireland has essentially been colonised by the EU and would no longer be a proper part of the UK. So those are the issues which the Prime Minister is contending with. And to compound that, the DUP feels as though it's been treated badly. The deal has apparently been on the table for a few weeks now, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak went over to Europe, spoke to European leaders before going to the DUP. So the DUP feels as though its nose is out of joint, and the ERG, that very influential group of conservative Brexiteer backbenchers, are supporting the DUP in their concerns. And what we're now seeing is it's not just backbenchers. There are a few cabinet ministers who are getting a little bit twitchy about it too. And we've heard this morning that there are a couple who are on resignation watch. Well, Suella Braverman was pretty forthright in her condemnation of the deal as it is so far. And the other name that I'm hearing is Steve Baker, who is a Northern Ireland minister and was chairman of the ERG back in 2016-17. And he feels as though he's been frozen out of these negotiations as they've progressed. So Rishi Sunak's deal was never going to be hugely popular with either the DUP or the ERG, given those pretty big issues around sovereignty pertaining to Northern Ireland. But it seems as though he may have made matters worse by attempting to get the EU on side by having these negotiations in secret, which, although you can see the merits of that, has meant that there are a few very important people who now feel as though they've been sidelined.
Yeah, and indeed, perhaps more video negotiations going on, we're told, with the Foreign Secretary, Northern Ireland Secretary and the EU later this afternoon. But, of course, we'll see what emerges from that. Olivia at Westminster, thank you very much indeed. But let's update you on some developments now in terms of the Nicola Bulley story, with the media watchdog Ofcom announcing that it is extremely concerned to hear the comments made by the family of Nicola Bulley about two broadcast licences. Ofcom going on to say, we have written to ITV and to Sky, and this, of course, is Sky News, to ask them to explain their actions. We will then assess whether any further action is required. You remember that there was a statement read out by Lancashire Police on behalf of the family, criticising the fact that the family had been contacted even though they had requested that they be left alone. Separately, Downing Street has said it expects the Lancashire Police internal investigation to be transparent, it says, in the handling of the Nicola Bulley case. This is just coming from the Prime Minister's official spokesman, who's been speaking to reporters after the Cabinet meeting. Asked whether the Prime Minister believed the external review would be necessary, the spokesman saying, our position is to allow the existing process to report back. We will then expect Lancashire Police to detail their findings, and obviously we will consider the next step as appropriate. So the reporters asked the Prime Minister's spokesman, would that be Lancashire Police effectively marking their own homework? The spokesman saying these are long-established processes and we would expect the force to be transparent in their findings. This does not preclude further work at the end of that. So clearly still many questions being asked about the way that the case was handled. Well, let's return now to this issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol and the political wranglings. Let's head back to Northern Ireland and speak to Ben Lowry, who's editor of the newsletter there. Ben, thank you very much indeed for your time. As we were discussing with Olivia, I mean, indications that perhaps there's another video conference on the way this afternoon with the Foreign Secretary, Northern Ireland Secretary and the EU. What's the assessment there in Northern Ireland about how close we may be to some kind of accord?
Well, the thing is that Northern Ireland is not the place to ask how close we are to an accord, because those of us in Northern Ireland who follow events very closely and try to find out what's going on in London have difficulty. The people who know exactly what's going on is very small in number in and around Downing Street and in Brussels. But it's an important question anyway, in terms of the feel. And if you want to understand what's happened really lately and why there has been this backlash amongst Tory MPs, I imagine, and amongst unionism, is that with time, the opposition to the Northern Ireland Protocol has grown, because it's quite a complicated thing. People don't like to admit that they don't understand something, but very few people have understood a lot of the intricacies of this. Trades experts did, constitutional lawyers did. And so, for example, at the weekend, we ran a report by a Hollier. The report we just had there was wrong in one respect, very interesting report. It said about the movements, it's the other way around. It's Northern Ireland to Great Britain is unfettered, more or less. It's Great Britain to Northern Ireland that is fettered. And we had a Hollier who was saying that, yes, they're probably in this deal, they're going to more or less get rid of the checks. There'll be very few checks. But the thing that's put off companies in Great Britain is the paperwork, and the paperwork might not be changed. So what we're actually seeing... Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, because we spoke to Arlene Foster a little earlier, and she was talking about the importance perhaps to develop this and trying to break through the impasse, to decouple this issue, the technicalities, if you like, the nuts and bolts of the customs situation and the trade paperwork and the whole political entity. I mean, is that being seen perhaps as one of the ways that they could get to some accord?
Yes, although, again, if I'm to talk in terms of why there's been a turning against this, what has actually been flushed out over the last 2 years is what the protocol is. And what the protocol is that Northern Ireland, insofar as rules relate to trade, is part of the European Union. It's the European Union as the trade. Now, the European Union is not even renegotiating that. And the only way that there really ever was, it's almost irreconcilable, but the nearest, perhaps you could say, if you're a unionist or a Eurosceptic Tory, of reconciling it was this Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which the government introduced, which in many respects is an enabling act, but it gives ministers the right to disapply it. Now, that's not aspects of the protocol, I mean, aspects of European Union law, aspects of European Union rules, which are at the crux of the problem if you're a unionist. And that's not an insignificant thing, because if the UK, as Brexiteers want, and even many people who are not Brexiteers think, well, if we're leaving the EU, we might as well diverge from the EU. We're better if we do our own thing. If that happens over years and Northern Ireland is on the EU side, then the Gulf and the Irish Sea, that the intrinsic aspect of us being part of the United Kingdom should include unfettered trade. That gets greater, and the Northern Ireland Protocol would be able to pull back from that, or future ministers would be able to pull back from that. But the problem with that is that it was Boris Johnson. Perhaps you could say there was an element of guilt at what he'd agreed in 2019. They would say under extremists. Parliament was paralysed. Liz Truss, they were very committed to the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, and there's never been any indication that Rishi Sunak is. And indeed, there's no real suggestion that the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, I think the government nominally says it will, but there's no feeling that it will go ahead, and it's probably part of the impending deal with the EU that they're going to ditch that legislation.
Yeah, indeed, an indication from the Prime Minister's spokesman that wasn't discussed at Cabinet in number 10 this morning. But just to sort of knock it on a bit further, what do you make of what Brandon Lewis has had to say, former Northern Ireland Secretary, in terms of the political situation there, and that perhaps the whole reform, as he described it, of the Good Friday architecture, now 25 years on, to reflect, for instance, the changed electoral landscape? Well, he's talking about the Alliance Party and perhaps breaking this, as some would say, the DUP's position on the way forward in terms of Stormont and power sharing.
Well, I edit a unionist newspaper, so I'm very familiar with what unionists think. Yeah. And we would be just appalled at that. And I think anybody watching this show should think what the implications of that are. The implications are that Sinn Féin, which is by some measures in some elections now the biggest party, but it's pretty close between the DUP and Sinn Féin, a party that entirely legitimately doesn't want Northern Ireland to exist. That's a legitimate democratic aim. Does nonetheless emphatically defend the IRA terrorist campaign over decades. That a party like that, there's no suggestion of reforming Stormont by a Conservative and Unionist government when they brought Stormont down over an Irish Language Act. And now when Unionists are getting in the way and getting upset about something that this government itself has said it shares these concerns over the Irish Sea border. It's waxed and waned over that. But this government itself has often expressed extreme concern over what it agreed. And then suddenly when Unionists are trying to get their support, there's talk about changing the architecture of Stormont. If you want to know why Unionists, very few, are celebrating the impending 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, there you have your answer.
Indeed. We shall see what emerges, if anything, of course, this afternoon. But clearly, many people asking questions without, at the moment, it seems, many answers. But Ben, for the moment, thank you for joining us here in GB News. I suspect we'll be speaking to you again fairly shortly. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
OK, let's turn back to events in Ukraine and Russia, and indeed, as we saw a little earlier, Warsaw. Earlier, President Putin, the Russian leader, speaking for more than 2 hours about Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the State of the Union address, blaming the West, of course, for escalating and indeed even provoking the war, saying the United States and allies had sought limitless power. Well, that speech coming ahead of the first anniversary of the invasion. That's actually on Friday, with speculation that Russia could be launching a fresh spring offensive. Putin saying he'd suspended Russia's participation too in the remaining nuclear treaty with the US, and indeed now this news that maybe the US ambassador is being summoned to the Kremlin. Well, let's get the views of defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford joining us. Stuart, thank you for your time. We await to see what this diplomatic dance is in terms of the US ambassador, but clearly this does fit in with the Putin playbook, doesn't it? Up the ante.
Oh, absolutely. And, if one being super critical, I think that much of the gist of the speech was bordering on the delusional, along the lines of it wasn't his fault, it was someone else, a big boy who ran away, and all this sort of nonsense. But I think Putin used the opportunity over the 2-hour-plus speech to basically throw all his teddy bears out of the pram and play the victim. And that just won't wash in the West. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what President Biden says when he speaks later in Warsaw.
Yeah, it's been dubbed by some the battle of the speeches. I mean, I know Biden's already sort of spoken after meeting Zelensky and indication, democracy is winning in his view. But clearly there are now things starting to crystallise or clarify. And we've got Moscow talking about pulling out the nuclear arms treaty. As you say, we've got the ambassador being summoned. What sort of moves does Putin have left in his army before starting to move the tanks and the artillery back up to the border with Ukraine?
I don't think he's got many options left. I mean, he's always been rattling the nuclear weapons saber, if you like. But I don't think there's any real desire on his part, or indeed on the Russians' part, to enter into any sort of nuclear exchange or exchange of weapons of mass destruction like chemical and biological weaponry, because that will bring NATO and the West into the conflict directly. And there's no future for Russia in a direct war with NATO. What is interesting, I think, is that the Secretary of State Blinken has talked about China now considering sending what he calls lethal aid to Russia, which would no doubt prolong the war if that were to take place.
And indeed worries, therefore, about whether the West could keep up with literally the guns and bullets and supply the sort of armaments and ammunition needed to compete with the Chinese.
No, absolutely. I think Putin was looking, when he started all this military adventurism off, he was looking at a sprint, and he's now ended up in a marathon. And it's become really a contest of stamina. Can Russia sustain its efforts from its own side of the battle? Indeed. And will the West continue to supply Ukraine with what it needs until some sort of resolution is reached?
Stuart, thank you very much indeed for that. And more analysis to come. We'll have the latest from Warsaw and, of course, from Moscow, and indeed find out what's happening in Washington too. All that to come in this next hour. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 1 o'clock and you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this hour. Can he fix it? Yes, he can, says number 10. No, he can't, say the DUP, and perhaps many of his own backbenchers and some ministers too. The political headache of Brexit, which did for Theresa May, is now causing Rishi Sunak to reach for the aspirin bottle, trying to juggle the competing pressures over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, Downing Street has been making approaches to Europe to move the process forward, but it's sounding alarm bells in Stormont and on his own backbenches. The Cabinet meeting this morning trying to sell his vision, but the Eurosceptic ERG group to assess this afternoon what it looks like to them. Yet more trouble, it seems, for an embattled government. More with our political editor in Belfast coming up. Is it all over for this woman, Kate Forbes, before it's even begun? In her interview last night, the Scottish Finance Minister pressed on her views on same-sex marriage. It didn't go down at all well with senior members of the SNP. So are we looking now at First Minister Humza Yousaf as a shoo-in? We'll have the latest from Edinburgh on that. And what are the odds of the Sussexes taking on the satirical comedy series South Park? No, this is the Nicola media row. We'll just to update you on that. The media watchdog Ofcom has said it is extremely concerned by comments by the family of Nicola Bulley and has now written to ITV and Sky to ask them to explain their actions. This is over the fact that they had contacted the family. So that's coming up for you in a moment. Stay with us and we'll have all the latest bulletin news now with Tamsin.
Thanks very much, Mark. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 1. The media regulator says it's extremely concerned by the actions of two broadcasters following comments made by Nicola Bulley's family. Both ITV and Sky contacted the 45-year-old's family after her body was discovered, despite their plea for privacy. Ofcom has written to both companies asking them to explain their actions. Police are also being criticised over the way they handled the case. The missing mother of two was found in the River Wire on Sunday, more than 3 weeks after she disappeared. Former Met detective Peter Blexley told GB News the investigation has not been up to scratch.
They're going to have to take a very long, hard look at how they've conducted all of this, not only the investigation, but very much the communication. And I hope that the wider British police take some lessons from all of this, because quite frankly, if you get the messaging wrong and people don't believe you, they're not going to trust your investigations. And that, I think, is part of the reason why so many people turned up at St Michael's on Wye.
Russia has issued a warning to the West by suspending its participation in a nuclear arms treaty with the US. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major speech on the war in Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it describes as an aggressive course set by Washington.
Russia does not abandon the treaty, but suspends its participation. Before resuming the discussion of this treaty, we must first understand what do such countries of NATO, like France and Great Britain, aspire to do, and how will we take their strategic arsenals into account.
Keir Giles, a senior fellow at Chatham House, told GB News Russia's decision to suspend the nuclear treaty isn't necessarily cause for concern.
Russia stepping away from one of the few remaining arms control treaties, in this case regarding nuclear weapons, that actually kept the development of nuclear weapons on both sides under control. And again, the specific rationale that he has pointed to for doing this is the fact that the UK and France are not included in that. He's also said that Russia may resume nuclear testing. That too is an expected development, but he specifically ruled out that happening unless the United States starts first. So that is an interesting twist on things that we were thinking were going to happen.
The Prime Minister says intensive negotiations with the EU are continuing as speculation mounts over a possible deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak told his cabinet he's looking to address three main areas: safeguarding Northern Ireland's place within the Union, protecting the Belfast Agreement and ensuring the free flow of trade. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is due to hold in-person talks this week with the EU's Maros Sefcovic after what was described as a productive video discussion. The Turkey-Syria border has been hit by another earthquake. It comes just 2 weeks after huge tremors rocked the region, killing more than 47,000 people. The latest quake of magnitude 6.4 has killed at least 6 people. Almost 300 others have been injured. Founder of the Global Relief Trust, Shahida Rahman, says people are still upset by the previous earthquake.
Tonight, in several cities, not only in Hatay, but also in neighboring cities such as Adana and Gaziantep, people rushed to the oil stations to get petrol and gas to their cars, and they slept in their cars, or some of them even try to drive to outskirts of the cities or to other regions, safer regions. And aftershocks are still ongoing, unfortunately, in the region. and the trauma is still going on.
The Princess of Wales is visiting a nursing home in Berkshire to discover how it cares for the elderly. She's learning how those at the end of their lives are supported at the Oxford House nursing home. She'll also hear about their use of technology to stimulate and improve the daily lives of residents. This is GB News. More from me in a while. Now, though, it's over to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. So it's 7 minutes past 1, February 2023, but you may be excused for feeling it's a bit 2019, because Rishi Sunak has chaired a cabinet meeting amid growing splits both within his party and indeed his government ministers over the mooted deal to end the Brexit deadlock on Northern Ireland. The Prime Minister told the Cabinet that he was seeking to address 3 areas: protecting Northern Ireland's place in the UK, protecting the Good Friday Agreement and protecting the free flow of trade across the Irish Sea. Let's speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Belfast for us. And Darren, we've also got an indication that another video conference call taking place with the Foreign Secretary, the Northern Ireland Secretary and a European Commissioner. Indications perhaps they're still trying to find a way through this.
Yeah, I think there are kind of 2 tracks, if you like, to all of this, Mark. First of all, there are those continuing negotiations with the European Union. Now, I think we've got the outline of a deal. Clearly, we haven't got the detail of what that is, but Rishi Sunak would not have come here to Belfast last week and met with political leaders if he didn't think a deal was pretty close. So those negotiations are still continuing to see, I think, if they can eke out a few more concessions from the European Union. As you say, the Foreign Secretary is leading those, as he has done in the past with the EU Commission, and we are expecting, beyond that Zoom call this afternoon, a face-to-face meeting at some stage later on this week as well. So that is one track, that's essentially between the British government and the EU Commission. The second, and in some ways the more complicated track in all of this, is dealing with the dissent and concerns within the Conservative Party from, most notably, the ERG group. That's the kind of hardcore Brexiteers, if you like, within the Conservative Party, who are concerned about where this deal might land, because they're also concerned that the DUP, the main unionist party here in Northern Ireland, also don't seem to be on board. And Jacob Rees-Mogg and others were saying this morning, frankly, we cannot agree to a deal that the DUP is not signed up to. And it's clear at the moment the DUP are not in a position to say that they agree with what the Prime Minister has at least orally put forward. They've not seen any document, they've not seen any text they can sign up to. They recognise progress has been made, but at the moment the message from Belfast is frankly not enough.
Yeah, and an indication, of course, that we got the ERG, the hardline Eurosceptics, if you like, or hardline Brexiteers meeting this afternoon, causing Rishi Sunak yet more difficulties. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, has drawn this parallel with what happened to Theresa May. I mean, is Rishi Sunak in that sort of peril?
Yeah, I think it is quite difficult, actually, when you listen to what Rishi Sunak has to say about all the issues about this. So there's a man shouting over me. I will hand back to you, Mark, in the studio.
OK, we shall get back to Belfast and reconnect with Darren once we've got a bit of a calmer situation there. But let's now speak to Jonathan Tongue, who's a professor in British and Irish politics. And, Professor, we're just hearing there, of course, the emotions of Belfast in terms of what may or may not happen. Where do you assess we are? Downing Street earlier, the Prime Minister's official spokesman saying still long-lasting challenges, but progress being made in talks with the EU. But clearly, from the ERG to the DUP, they're trying to work out what the cost may be to them as they see it.
Yeah, I think in terms of the UK-EU relationship, things are much improved and we're very, very close to a deal. So this then becomes a question of selling that deal, and Rishi Sunak's going to have to be one of the smoothest salespeople on this earth to sell it to 2 particular constituencies. One is the European Research Group within his own party. Rishi Sunak's in a better position than Theresa May because Keir Starmer, as leader of the opposition, has made clear that he will support the deal. So the ERG
cannot bring down the deal itself via Westminster arithmetic. But if Rishi Sunak's confronted by a huge rebellion within his own party, then clearly that's a big embarrassment for Rishi Sunak and could bring into question his entire leadership of the party. Then there's the question of doing a deal with the DUP, because the DUP are very, very sceptic on this, and they will take an awful lot of persuading.
Well, what do you make of this report that was in the Times at the weekend saying that Rishi Sunak was willing to go ahead with what was described the UK-EU accord even without the support of the DUP? And clearly, obviously, Sir Keir Starmer indicating the votes are there if needs be to get this through. But, I mean, what would, there'd be a smoking ruin left after that, wouldn't there?
Well, it'd be the end of the institutions in Northern Ireland. It would be the political end of the Good Friday Agreement, because if the DUP don't go back into the institutions are collapsed unless you change the rules that pertain in Belfast and don't allow the DUP to veto those institutions anymore. Perhaps the government is contemplating that, but that would be a huge risk if you simply try and tread over the largest representatives of unionism within Northern Ireland. So, I mean, Rishi Sunak's got a very difficult decision here. I mean, we're approaching the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. There's been talk of Joe Biden coming over, a big celebration of that 25th anniversary. It would be pretty hollow if there were no political institutions associated with that agreement in play. So I think the DUP is key to this, but the DUP are insistent that the role of the European Court of Justice must be removed from the equation. The EU has gone quite a long way in terms of promising to remove checks on goods going between Great Britain to Northern Ireland. The DUP could claim that as a win, but there's still that legal issue, whose law pertains in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and Sammy Wilson, the DUP, indicating that they would not accept any agreement that kept Northern Ireland in the EU single market. So do you believe this is what really is being discussed in these video calls, is trying to get the, if you like, the paperwork, the bureaucracy of the customs checks, the red and green channels, everything else that we've spoken about, but putting to one side the whole question about the political sovereignty?
Yeah, I mean, it's about sovereignty and it's about sausages. The checks are being removed. The European Union has signed up to what was originally that bill of Liz Truss's, that domestic protocol bill, which disapplies the protocol. In effect, the EU has agreed, look, there don't need to be checks on goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So that's fine. That's sorted effectively with the DUP. But there's still the issue of who is the ultimate arbiter of any disputes arising from the protocol, which will remain in place for goods going onwards into the EU single market. Who is the ultimate arbiter here? Will it be United Kingdom courts, or will it be European Union law and the European Court of Justice? And at the moment, the EU isn't budging fully on that in a way that the DUP wants. That's likely to be a big stumbling block. You've heard the noises from Sammy Wilson, as you point out. Jeffrey Donaldson, as leader of the DUP, and Rishi Sunak have got a big job persuading the Sammy Wilsons of this world to move on that issue.
And of course, we're looking at 25 years on. The additional ingredient that's been added now is from Brandon Lewis, former Northern Ireland Secretary, talking about perhaps reform of the Good Friday architecture, as he described it, in terms of reflecting the views of the Alliance Party, in terms of its changing electoral position, and therefore what that would mean for the DUP.
Yeah, you sense the frustration that's represented by those comments from Brandon Lewis with the fact that the Northern Ireland executive keeps collapsing. If you look at the last 6 years of so-called devolved power sharing, those institutions have not been in place for 60% of the time. That's worse than the first 6 years, when it was perhaps excusable when Northern Ireland was coming out of conflict. And so the government has the option of changing the rules and not allowing the largest nationalist or unionist parties to have those vetoes. But if you simply say, well, we're going to ignore the DUP as the leader of unionism, you do create potentially a dangerous political crisis within Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and all bets are off, of course, following the difficulties of 25 years ago. Professor Tung, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And, of course, we'll see what emerges from this afternoon's video calls. Thank you very much indeed. But let's refer you to this breaking news on the Nicola Bulley story now. Within the past hour, the media watchdog group Ofcom saying it has extreme concerns after Nicola Bulley's family had revealed they were contacted by two broadcasters after her body had been discovered when they'd expressly asked for privacy. Well, Ofcom says they've been in contact with the broadcasters concerned, ITV and Sky, to ask them to explain their actions. In a statement issued through Lancashire Police, the family had also said the press and public must be held accountable for false accusations and the vilification of friends and loved ones during the search for her. Well, let's get more now with our reporter, Theo Chikombo, who is in Lancashire at the scene still. And Theo, clearly this relates to the both, I think they call the TikTokers, the social media, but also now the mainstream media as well, in the way they've been reporting the case.
That's right. Throughout this, the police, Lancashire police specifically, have been consistent, saying people should refrain from speculating, but also giving the family space as well, particularly during their investigation. As we understand, the media watchdog Ofcom has contacted the two broadcasters about their approach, particularly on Sunday, where we had understood that on Sunday morning someone had seen a body in the River Wire and subsequently contacted the police, who went on to investigate that. And of course, the police that day said they are working hard to find out who it is and, of course, be in touch with Nicola Bulley's family as part of their investigation. And, of course, they did ask for privacy during that time. And what we understand, as has been reported, is that those companies did get in touch with the family during that day. And of course, it's something that has been criticised over the last few days, particularly how this case has been handled on both sides with the press and the police, particularly in the police where they disclosed particularly personal information, whether or not they should or shouldn't have. And a review is underway at the moment.
Indeed, and Lancashire police indicating indirectly that perhaps they had to take that decision because the suggestion was there'd been some kind of deal done with the media to release those personal details of Nicola's position as a so-called exclusive. So, again, perhaps something that the various watchdogs will have to look at.
Yes, that's right. I understand there are three reviews going into what happened over the last few weeks, looking into the police's the way they conducted themselves over the last few weeks, whether or not the communication was right. But of course, they were trying to investigate, but also give information as and when needed. But of course, which information they gave to the press is something that's going to be looked at in this review. And of course, you mentioned those who are using social media platforms. It's a difficult landscape at the moment because people can easily upload anything on social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and of course give their own views and speculation as well, which is something the police at the time did say people should refrain from doing so. So these are questions which are going to be asked over the next few weeks and months as those reviews take place.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Thea, for updating us on that. Just to remind you about what the family had said in the statement. We had tried last night to take in what we'd been told in the day, only to have Sky News and ITV making contact with us directly when we expressly asked for privacy. They have again taken it upon themselves to run story about us to sell papers and increase their own profits. Of course, we should point out that they are television broadcasters rather than publishers of newspapers. It is shameful they have acted in this way. Leave us alone now. The family going on to the press and other media channels and so-called professionals not know when to stop. These are our lives and our children's lives. So, as we were saying, indication Ofcom now taking up that case, and we'll update you on the latest as we get it from Ofcom and Lancashire Police too. Coming up, we'll have the latest on politics north of the border. Where is the SNP leadership race? Is it down from 3 to 2? That's coming up in a moment. First, the weather for you.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Another dry, cloudy and mild day for most today, but we are going to see a change by tomorrow. That's because of this cold front. Tucked in ahead of it, we've got the mild air. That's why temperatures are above average today, but behind it, there's blue, suggesting the colder air, and that weather front will be pushing across the country tonight and tomorrow. But it's not here yet, so for most places it is another mild but cloudy day. Some holes in the cloud, northeast England and particularly northeast Scotland, where we're seeing a bit of sunshine, but generally staying fairly drab. Perhaps a little brighter over East Wales and southeast England this afternoon. That weather front will eventually bring some rain to the Western Isles. But as I said, ahead of it, it is mild. So temperatures not quite as high as yesterday, but still 10 to 12, maybe 13 or 14 in Aberdeenshire. The rain will push into western Scotland and Northern Ireland through this evening. The winds will be picking up here as well. The rain not particularly heavy, but it will be spreading into parts of southern Scotland, northern England and Wales through the night. So things turning damp in the west, and we could see a few showers across the southeast and East Anglia by the end of the night as well. Another pretty mild one, but the colder air is coming into the northwest. The temperatures here by dawn getting down to 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. And a colder feel tomorrow for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but there will be some sunshine. A grey start for England and Wales with some outbreaks of rain. In fact, most of the day looking fairly dull and damp across East Anglia and the southeast. Brightening up over the Midlands and Wales, just 1 or 2 scattered showers. Some sunny spells for northern England, and the showers turning wintry over northern Scotland, chiefly over the hills, but some wintry weather down to lower levels, and it could turn icy on Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. Still some outbreaks of rain across East Anglia and the southeast. They'll linger into Thursday morning, but clearer skies elsewhere and a hint of blue on the chart. Yes, frosts will become a thing once more later this week as things turn a little bit colder. There should be some sunny spells too.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's take you back north of the border to find out what's happening in terms of the race to lead the SNP. Well, it's getting quite exciting because Kate Forbes' bid to take over from Nicola Sturgeon as the next First Minister seems to be already in trouble, just a day after officially announcing her candidacy. Although she said a little later her campaign for the leadership very much alive. However, a key backer is announcing they can no longer support the Finance Secretary after she said she would have voted against legislation on same-sex unions. Of course, that was passed back in 2014 by Holyrood. She's one of 3 confirmed candidates in the contest alongside Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan. Well, let's get the views now. John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. John, thank you for joining us once more. I mean, she has sort of apologised if she's caused any pain or hurt by the comments and says the campaign is not over. But clearly we've got, at least 3 senior backers now abandoning her attempt.
Yes, the difficulty for Kate Forbes, of course, is that ultimately, although the leadership will be determined by the mass membership of the SNP, obviously it's pretty important that whoever is the leader has the confidence of Holyrood MSPs. And I think Miss Forbes has misjudged the extent to which, although it may well be that her own particular church, the Free Church of Scotland, is still one where there is a degree of disquiet about same-sex relationships, and certainly the idea that marriage as a religious ceremony should be confined to heterosexual couples, that the truth is, during the course of the last 20 years, Scotland, like the United Kingdom as a whole, has seen a radical change in attitudes. And last time we asked about this in Scotland, which was at around the time of the equal marriage being introduced, already 2/3 of people were in favour of equal marriage. And in truth, even amongst those who identified as Christians, a majority said they were in favour of equal marriage. So I think Kate Forbes has perhaps misunderstood the extent to which, on this issue at least, her views and perhaps the views of with whom she practices her faith are in fact now quite markedly out of line, in what of course is, for the most part now, a secular society.
Yeah, I mean, she's a member of the Free Church of Scotland and saying that she'd taken that position as a matter of conscience, although she'd added that, she believed in everyone's right in a pluralistic and tolerant society to live and to love free of harassment and fear. But, has there been a bit of political naivety maybe here?
Well, I think perhaps certainly, as I've just suggested, perhaps a failure to appreciate the character of public opinion. I mean, on the other issue, which the most immediate social issue, which of course is controversy inside the SNP and more broadly in Scotland, gender recognition. Some polling suggests that SNP voters are also critical of the government stance, and even the most recent polling suggested they were divided down the middle. So the fact that Kate Forbes is not very keen on gender recognition does fit in with a wider public sensibility, including that amongst SNP voters. Although SNP voters might still want the Scottish Government to challenge the UK Government's veto. But on same-sex relationships, attitudes are now very firmly in favour, and that in that sense, at least, of course, at the end of the day, a First Minister isn't just somebody who's running the government. They also have to be somebody who speaks more broadly for Scotland.
Yes.
And I think some of our MSPs are just simply concerned that these views are now too far apart from those which are now prevalent, but not just in Scotland, but across the UK as a whole.
And just lastly, John, then the intriguing position, of course, that we got Humza Yousaf having promised to stand by the controversial gender recognition reform bill, which some say did for Nicola Sturgeon, and indeed challenges the Section 35 order from Westminster.
Yes, I mean, I think in challenging the Section 35 order, Humza probably has a majority of SNP folk behind him. But on the gender recognition bill, and that's the area where he is perhaps somewhere away from where many SNP voters at least are at. We know less, of course, about the actual activists themselves. But of course, what's also true, I mean, the early polling suggested, although Humza Yousaf was the better known of the two candidates, he actually was also less popular, not only amongst the public in Scotland in general, but also amongst SNP voters in particular. And I think the question now is, will have SNP voters and therefore perhaps SNP activists change their minds about Kate Forbes, even though I would have thought most SNP activists would have been aware that she had relatively conservative views on these kinds of subjects, including on same-sex relationships.
John, as ever, thank you for bringing your expert analysis to here on GB News. Thanks very much. Well, let's return now to Warsaw, where President Biden has been meeting Andrzej Duda, the leader of Poland. there is a meeting underway across a very big table with a speech due from the US President 4:30 our time. And, of course, perhaps a very different narrative to what we heard from President Putin in his address, which was almost, more than 2 hours indeed. And just to remind you, Putin indicating that it was the fault of the West in terms of starting the Ukraine war, with the West wanting to spark global conflict and achieve limitless power, as he said. Also going on to say Russia would no longer participate in the nuclear arms treaty. And separately, we've got this report that the US ambassador being summoned to the Kremlin as well. So a diplomatic escalation going on, but indications that we're getting from President Biden that he is to hold with this position of NATO standing firm. Of course, we had him speaking in Kyiv yesterday with President Zelensky and, of course, revealing that there's another $500 million worth of arms and ammunition on the way. So we'll assess the situation and update you. As you say, 4:30 this afternoon, we're expecting the speech, but more reaction to come. Let's get an update on the other headlines now. Tamsin's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 1:32. The media regulator says it's extremely concerned by the actions of two broadcasters following comments made by Nicola Bulley's family. Both ITV and Sky contacted the 45-year-old's family after her body was discovered, despite their plea for privacy. Ofcom has written to both companies, asking them to explain their actions. Police are also being criticised over the way they handled her disappearance. Russia has issued a warning to the West by suspending its participation in a nuclear arms treaty with the US. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major speech on the war in Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it describes as an aggressive course set by Washington. The Prime Minister says intensive negotiations with the EU are continuing as speculation mounts over a possible deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak told his cabinet he's looking to address three main areas: safeguarding Northern Ireland's place within the Union, protecting the Belfast Agreement and ensuring the free flow of trade. The Foreign Secretary and Northern Ireland Secretary will hold talks later this afternoon with the EU's Maros Sefcovic. The Turkey-Syria border has been hit by another earthquake 2 weeks after huge tremors rocked the region, killing more than 47,000 people. The latest quake of magnitude 6.4 has claimed at least 6 lives. Almost 300 people have been injured. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live, with President Putin having delivered his annual speech a little earlier in Moscow, all 2 hours plus of it, blaming the West for escalating the war, saying the US and its allies sought limitless powers, and the reaction from the United States slamming the absurdity of his State of the Nation speech. But he went on to say that Russia was suspending the key US nuclear arms deal. And, of course, it's coming up on Friday, the one-year anniversary since the invasion of Ukraine happened. And since then, huge military losses, but predicted there will be a spring offensive shortly. Well, President Biden is in Warsaw at the moment. These are the pictures where he's holding these talks, with a speech expected from the American president at about 4:30 in the Polish city. But let's have a listen to what Vladimir Putin had to say a little earlier.
The Western elites do not conceal their goals. As they say, and it's a direct quote, to bring Russia a strategic defeat. What does it mean? What is it for us? It means to end us once and for all. It means they plan to turn a local conflict into a global confrontation. We understand it exactly like that. We will react to it accordingly. This is because, in this case, it is about the very existence of our country.
Well, let's get the views now. Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard. And Robert, suggestions maybe this is straight out of the Putin playbook.
Yes, I think that he was laying down a new line of confrontation with the West. And I think that this is quite serious. The one thing he avoided mentioning, of course, is what is actually happening on the battlefront itself, where things are not so good. You've talked about this much advertised offensive. There have been probes and actions where Russia hasn't come off very well. So we go global. He talked about new allies, which was fascinating. But most serious was he's calling off the last major agreement he has with the West and the United States, that he's suspending the strategic arms reduction talks. And that means all agreements, major military agreements with the West, have gone. What he's going to do next, we can only guess, because on the front, I have to reiterate, it's stalemate.
Yeah, and an indication, of course, that even as the weather warms, that he perhaps won't be able to make any major inroads towards Kyiv or elsewhere. But the Donbass, another question. And, of course, he's still got Crimea. But the other thing that people have been starting to talk about is the position of Belarus and then Moldova, that maybe he will turn the focus away from Ukraine itself.
I'm not entirely sure about that. You're quite right. I think that he may have some nasty tricks up his sleeve, in that he may do things around the Arctic, around the Black Sea, may go maritime. And by the way, that's where Britain really is vulnerable. Our seas are vulnerable. If Russia starts probing underwater pipelines, underwater cables, which they have been doing already over the past year, then we have got to up our game. And I think that this is why actually this posturing, as well as new posture of Putin, really has a real message for the Brits. It's strengthened Ben Wallace's hand, of course, as he asks for more money for defence. It really is needed.
And what do you make of this or growing accord, perhaps, with Beijing and China, indicating that perhaps it will be talking to the Kremlin? I mean, is that going to be direct supply of armaments and ammunition? Because that could cause NATO a real problem, just keeping up with the guns and bullets.
Well, I really can't predict, but I think it's the really important development on the anniversary weekend. It's probably more important than anything that's going to happen on the battlefield. What is Xi going to do? We hear he's got a peace plan, and we know that they're going to buy more hydrocarbons from Russia, though that can't be significant because the facilities, the infrastructure isn't there. But this did feature in the Putin speech, opening to Mongolia, opening to China, and, quote, the new allies or new alliances with Iran and India. I think that where Xi will go, to answer you, he will be very cautious about being seen to be directly involved militarily. And I think that he's going to hold off for a bit about arms, because I think he's going to watch to see the way, as you say, in inverted commas, this spring offensive, which looks a bit of a dud already, or very partial, how that goes, and then China will decide what to do militarily.
And looking at the audience reaction to the speech, rambling over 2 hours or more, stony-faced silence apart from the sort of obligatory applause. What is the position, do you think, of Putin in the Kremlin, bearing in mind all the suggestions that maybe the Wagner Group are getting a little bit frustrated, and others looking at the cost in men and materiel of what's being called this operation, the special military operation?
Wagner Group extremely angry because it's not getting artillery that it's asked for and artillery shells that it needs. And they've had a pasting in the central Donbass sector. There's no doubt about it. And Putin is holding Prigozhin, their leader, at arm's length. That's the Wagner Group. And they're finding it very difficult to absorb irregulars like Wagner into the main forces there. Now, the audience, it was sort of, they looked like ventriloquist dolls. They looked absolutely stony-faced. There was hardly a smile between them. And this was the hand-picked, this was Putin loyalism central.
Yeah.
And they didn't look too pleased, did they?
Well, 2 hours of it as well, so who knows? Anyway, Robert, thank you for that assessment. And, of course, we'll see what President Biden comes out with at 4:30 UK time in that speech in Warsaw. Thanks very much indeed. But let's bring you some breaking news now that we're getting from Press Association reporting that a Tory MP who'd been jailed for groping a 15-year-old boy freed from jail after serving half his prison sentence. This is Imran Ahmad Khan. He was jailed last May for 18 months after being found guilty of sexually assaulting the teenager. It follows a party in 2008. The 49-year-old losing the Court of Appeal challenge against conviction and sentence back in December. Well, the disgraced MP for Wakefield reportedly left Brixton Prison this morning, being met by friends carrying his belongings to a car before being driven away. And the pictures appearing to show him with, well, not here, these are previous pictures, now having long hair and a beard, we're being told, after serving 9 months. That's the latest pictures we got, with the Ministry of Justice confirming he had been released 2 days after winning his seat in West Yorkshire. He was contacting one of the victim's relatives to express concerns about the incident in 2008, the victim then going to the police. He was then expelled from the Conservative Party, resigning after his conviction to trigger the by-election, which is won by Labour. We remember the court case said it displayed a significant degree of brutality in the lead-up to the assault at a house in Staffordshire. He dragged his victim upstairs, threw him on a bed, forcing the teenager to drink gin and then asking him to watch pornography. And in sentencing him, the Justice, Jeremy Baker, saying the only regret you feel is towards yourself for having found yourself in the predicament you faced as a result of your actions 14 years ago. So released from prison a little earlier. Of course, more reaction as we get it. Now, to Westminster and number 10, where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been chairing a cabinet this morning amid these reports of growing tensions within his own party over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Democratic Unionist Party, Stormont already declaring that this is the moment, the words of Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. And the Eurosceptic ERG group of Tory MPs due to meet later this afternoon. So could this be another existential Brexit crisis for the Tory party? Let's get more with our political reporter, Olivia Utley. And Olivia, we've had these sort of various indications of the cabinet being updated, but not much really being said in terms of the substance of where we are.
No, it sounds like it was a little bit of a tense cabinet meeting this morning with these rumours of resignation watch. But essentially where we are this morning is this deal, which is still under wraps. No one has actually seen any text of the deal. Important to make that clear. Is currently making its way through this very long, drawn-out negotiating process, which really slowed down over the weekend. This afternoon, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, and Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, are set to have another meeting with EU officials where they hope to drive it forward a little bit more. But there are plenty of MPs on Rishi Sunak's own backbenches who are now saying if he can't get this deal past the DUP, then he shouldn't press ahead with it. And there are two pretty fundamental problems that the DUP has. One of them is that the deal essentially would leave Northern Ireland in the single market. There would still be checks on goods made in Northern Ireland coming into mainland Britain. And the other problem is that the ECJ, the European Courts of Justice, would still have jurisdiction over events taking place in Northern Ireland. So the DUP isn't happy about this at all. And the ERG, that influential group of backbench Conservative Brexiteers, has rode in behind them and says that it isn't very happy with the terms of the deal either. It seems as though Rishi Sunak might have made his bad position worse by taking so long speaking to the DUP about the deal. So the more we hear, it sounds as though Rishi Sunak was negotiating with EU leaders in private, not letting in his own backbench MPs or the DUP, in the hopes that he could build trust with the European Union, which sort of worked up to a point. He did manage to build that trust, but it means that the DUP and Conservative backbenchers and even Conservative ministers, Steve Baker, for example, is rumoured to be very discontent, feel as though their nose is a little bit out of joint, and they feel as though they've been left out. So at the moment, we heard big things late last week about a deal being put forward to Parliament on Tuesday. Well, that's today, and we are certainly not there yet.
And of course, the other ministerial situation of Suella Braverman, another sort of hardline Brexiteer, if you can call her that. The interesting question is, does Rishi Sunak call the ERG's bluff? Because, of course, he's been given this assurance by Sir Keir Starmer that the Labour votes would be there to get anything through Parliament.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It almost would, even without the support of the ERG, even with a very large Conservative rebellion, Rishi Sunak could get this deal through Parliament with the support of Labour. But no Prime Minister wants to be in a situation where they are relying on opposition votes to get through important legislation. It is a very clear sign of weakness within Parliament. And of course, Rishi Sunak is very worried indeed. He's in a pretty precarious place generally inside the Conservative Party. Conservative members didn't vote for him. And the last thing he wants is to be the enemy of his own backbenchers. He doesn't want to be seen as the politician who betrayed Brexit and ruined UK sovereignty, taking Northern Ireland essentially out of the UK bit by bit. So that is what he is desperate to avoid. So it's thought that he will probably do everything he can to get the DUP and ERG on side before he puts this deal to Parliament. But it doesn't look at the moment as though there's a huge amount of wiggle room on that question over the jurisdiction of the ECJ and over those customs checks of Northern Irish goods coming into Great Britain, which are the two things which are really the DUP is finding frustrating at the moment.
Yeah, and of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg indicating that perhaps we're looking at 2019 situation, and remember what happened with Theresa May. But we shall see what emerges later this afternoon with the ERG group meeting. But for the moment, Olivia, thank you for updating us there in Westminster. Now, we've got two more earthquakes having hit Turkey and Syria, killing hundreds, or at least 6 people, and injuring hundreds more people. Of course, assessments still being made on the ground. This was a 6.3 magnitude quake hitting after those 3 devastating earthquakes of a fortnight ago, with more than 40,000 people have been killed. Well, yesterday's tremors felt across Lebanon, Jordan, Israel and Egypt. Let's get the latest now with Atikur Rahman, who's Head of Development at Global Relief Trust, updating us. Thank you very much for your time once more. And I guess one of the problems is that many of those buildings weakened by the original quake have actually been damaged once more by this second one.
Yeah, I mean, our team were actually travelling. They were actually in the area, the epicenter of the new earthquake that happened, and it was quite quick succession. There was one around 6.3, and then there was one a few moments later at 5.8, and of course it triggered a tsunami warning as well at the time. And I think people are just terrified to go back into buildings right now. The situation is that, these buildings, some of these buildings are still standing, have been weakened. There's been cracks, and people are now worried. I was speaking to some of our staff, and they were saying that some of their children, middle of the night, preferred to be sleeping outside. They were too scared to be sleeping inside, and these are young children.
Yeah, and I think this particular area is Antakya, which of course is near the border with Syria, where it's very difficult for the aid agencies to get to. I mean, the other reports coming in is the aftermath of trying to get things like fresh drinking water, and even suggestions that we've had outbreaks of cholera.
Yes, that's one of the biggest worries, especially in Syria right now. There has been an outbreak of cholera. And look, one of the reasons is there's a lack of access to safe drinking water, but also the sewage systems, the sanitation, toilet facilities. There is a lack of, obviously majority of people would have been using these facilities within their buildings. Now these buildings are destroyed. A lot of people are staying in centres and other places that don't really have adequate hygiene facilities. So this is going to be a major issue, and it's a big concern as well if there is a major cholera outbreak as well.
And what's your the picture you're getting from your workers there on the ground about the relief effort that's getting through in terms of clothing and food, medical supplies and so on? I mean, are they beginning to get on top of the logistics, particularly with the situation in northern Syria?
Yeah, the logistics, I mean, look, ultimately, people, we're not talking about systems in the UK where there's a proper road structure. There are places where large lorries or trucks can't get to, so you're having to then get items from larger trucks into smaller trucks. There are places where the roads are damaged, so, that creates an issue. You're going to have to need four-wheel drives. And there are places, unfortunately, that... not all agencies actually aware these places are. Most people have moved to the countryside, for example, and getting to some of these locations could take 4, 5, 6 hours drive. And he's finding those pockets of people. Of course, a lot of people will stay together, but there are people who've just moved as far away from buildings as they can. And he's getting aid to these people. I mean, we're lucky in the sense that winter is dying out, meaning, we've seen the back end of winter in Syria. It's still fairly cold at night. But, we're glad to see that. But even then, even if people are sleeping in tents or makeshift shelters, it's simply not warm enough for people to sleep outside, basically.
Yeah, and we're just seeing some live pictures of the sort of clean-up with these diggers and the cranes trying to just clear the rubble. I mean, this, in terms of trying to get any kind of normalcy, is going to take years, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I was actually talking about this yesterday with the team. You're talking thousands of years of civilization has been destroyed in a matter of minutes. There was I visited there. Last time I was there, I visited a church that was 1900 years old. And there's a whole community around this church. There's houses, there's shops, there's businesses, etc., that were reliant on tourism coming into that area. And that's all been destroyed. That this church and mosque now has been totally flattened. And to rebuild this, I mean, how do you rebuild architectural design from 15, 16, 1700 years ago? It's almost impossible. So it's lost a lot of history. And, the modern time, the building, some of these buildings have been totally destroyed. We've heard about the Newcastle United, ex-Newcastle United footballer who passed away. I mean, I know the area he was staying in. These were pretty new buildings. And so if they didn't stand a chance with this earthquake, you can just imagine what the damage is for some of the older ones.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed again for joining us and updating us here on GB News. And of course, we'll wish all your aid workers on the ground good luck with their continued efforts. So the Global Relief Trust, thank you very much indeed. Coming up in this next hour, GB News Live, we'll be addressing the situation on the Northern Ireland Protocol. What will Keir Starmer say? He's expected to speak. Will he lend his support to Rishi Sunak against his own backbenchers? We'll be finding that out in a moment. First, let's get an update on the weather.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Another dry, cloudy and mild day for most today, but we are going to see a change by tomorrow. That's because of this cold front. Tucked in ahead of it, we've got the mild air. That's why temperatures are above average today. But behind it, there's blue, suggesting the colder air. And that weather front will be pushing across the country tonight and tomorrow. But it's not here yet, so for most places it is another mild but cloudy day. Some holes in the cloud, northeast England and particularly northeast Scotland, where we're seeing a bit of sunshine, but generally staying fairly drab. Perhaps a little brighter over East Wales and southeast England this afternoon. That weather front will eventually bring some rain to the Western Isles. But as I said, ahead of it, it is mild. So temperatures not quite as high as yesterday, but still 10 to 12, maybe 13 or 14 in Aberdeenshire. The rain will push into western Scotland and Northern Ireland through this evening. The winds will be picking up here as well. The rain not particularly heavy, but it will be spreading into parts of southern Scotland, northern England and Wales through the night. So things turning damp in the west. And we could see a few showers across the southeast and East Anglia by the end of the night as well. Another pretty mild one, but the colder air is coming into the northwest. The temperatures here by dawn getting down to 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. And a colder feel tomorrow for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but there will be some sunshine. A grey start for England and Wales with some outbreaks of rain. In fact, most of the day looking fairly dull and damp across East Anglia and the southeast. Brightening up over the Midlands and Wales, just 1 or 2 scattered showers. Some sunny spells for northern England. And the showers turning wintry over northern Scotland, chiefly over the hills, but some wintry weather down to lower levels. And it could turn icy on Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. Still some outbreaks of rain across East Anglia and the southeast. They'll linger into Thursday morning, but clearer skies elsewhere and a hint of blue on the chart. Yes, frosts will become a thing once more later this week as things turn a little bit colder. There should be some sunny spells too.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
It's 2 o'clock. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this afternoon, we'll be serving up the political hot potato of Brexit, which you remember did for Theresa May's premiership. But Northern Ireland appears to be proving too hot to handle for Rishi Sunak. He's trying to juggle the competing pressures from Northern Ireland politicians, the EU, and, of course, his own backbenchers. The Prime Minister holding a cabinet meeting early to try to sell his vision, but the Eurosceptic ERG group now assessing what they think of it. Has he had his chips over the Northern Ireland Protocol? We'll be talking to the political editor of the Belfast Telegraph. More storm clouds north of the border for the SNP leadership contender Kate Forbes. In an interview last night, the Scottish Finance Minister pressed on her views on same-sex marriage. Her answer didn't go down well, with senior members of the SNP. 3 have withdrawn their support. Is Humza Yousaf now a shoo-in as First Minister? The latest coming up from Edinburgh. And reports that the Duchess of Sussex is upset over recent depictions of her and Harry on South Park. What are the odds of Harry and Meghan taking legal action over this? The last episode ridiculing the couple over their privacy obsession. We'll ask royal watcher and former BBC royal correspondent Michael Cole on his view. Quite enjoying that. Anyway, get in touch with GB Views at gbnews.uk. We want to hear from you from all the top stories. Before that, latest headlines coming up with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 2. The media regulator says it's extremely concerned by the actions of 2 broadcasters following comments made by Nicola Bulley's family. Both ITV and Sky contacted the 45-year-old's relatives after her body was discovered in the River Wire on Sunday, despite an appeal for privacy. Ofcom has written to both companies asking them to explain their actions. Police are also being criticised over the way they've handled the case. Former Met Detective Peter Blexley told GB News the investigation has not been up to scratch.
They're going to have to take a very long, hard look at how they've conducted all of this, not only the investigation, but very much the communication. And I hope that the wider British police take some lessons from all of this, because quite frankly, if you get the messaging wrong and people don't believe you, they're not going to trust your investigations. And that, I think, is part of the reason why so many people turned up at St Michael's on Wye.
A former Conservative MP jailed for sexually assaulting a teenager has been freed from prison after serving half his term. Imran Ahmed Khan was jailed last May for groping a 15-year-old boy after a party in 2008. The 49-year-old lost a Court of Appeal challenge against his conviction and sentence in December. The Foreign and Northern Ireland Secretaries will hold fresh talks with the EU this afternoon on the protocol. Earlier, the Prime Minister told Cabinet intensive negotiations are continuing in a bid to resolve the outstanding issues. Rishi Sunak says 3 main areas are being addressed: safeguarding Northern Ireland's place within the Union, protecting the Belfast Agreement and ensuring the free flow of trade. Russia has issued a warning to the West by suspending its participation in a nuclear arms treaty with the US. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major speech on the war in Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it described as an aggressive course set by Washington.
Russia does not abandon the treaty, but suspends its participation. Before resuming the discussion of this treaty, we must first understand what do such countries of NATO, like France and Great Britain, aspire to do, and how will we take their strategic arsenals into account.
It comes as US President Joe Biden is in Warsaw for talks with his Polish counterpart, a day after his surprise visit to Kyiv. The pair have discussed the security and increasing NATO's presence in Poland. Joe Biden will also address the situation in Ukraine during a news conference later on this afternoon. The Turkey-Syria border has been hit by another earthquake. It comes just 2 weeks after huge tremors rocked the region, killing more than 47,000 people. The latest quake of magnitude 6.4 has killed at least 6 people. Almost 300 others have been injured. Founder of the Global Relief Trust, Shahadir Rahman, says people are still shaken by the previous earthquake.
Tonight, in several cities, not only in Hatay, but also in neighboring cities such as Adana and Gaziantep, people rush to the oil stations to get petrol and gas to their cars, and they slept in their cars, or some of them even try to drive to outskirts of the cities or to other regions, safer regions, and aftershocks are still ongoing, unfortunately, in the region, and the trauma is still going on.
This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So, where are we with the Northern Ireland Brexit deal? There are suggestions that ministers are planning to quit over how Rishi Sunak's been handling the new deal and the current protocol, which, of course, negotiated by Boris Johnson, and that being ripped up. Sunak hosting a cabinet meeting this morning to quell what could be a growing rebellion within his own party, and, of course, Northern Ireland's DUP, which had pulled out of the power-sharing government just over a year ago. The Prime Minister needing to tempt both to return and get a deal past his own MPs. But no details as yet. We're being told that there are video conference calls once more this afternoon with the Foreign Secretary, the Northern Ireland Secretary and the EU. And earlier, the Prime Minister telling the Cabinet that priorities protecting Northern Ireland's place in the UK, protecting the Good Friday Agreement and protecting the free flow of trade across the Irish Sea. Well, we believe Sir Keir Starmer is about to have his say on it, the Labour leader having promised his votes to the Prime Minister. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Session, and I've got a real sense of a buzz in the room. This conference is really getting heard outside of this conference. The news is carrying what you have to say. And to see this conference hall so full, I think is really, really uplifting. It feels like a very, very successful conference. And it's great to be here again with you. As Minette said, my first speech to your conference was on Zoom. And it's not just quite the same, is it, when it's all done on Zoom. And I have to say, there was a moment over the weekend where I thought I might have to do it again, because you'll have seen the briefings that the protocol discussions have been going forward, and it's being briefed over the weekend that the protocol was going to be signed off on Tuesday, which would have meant that just about now the Prime Minister would be making a statement in the House of Commons, and I would have to be back there with him responding to it. So I'm very glad for the time being that the protocol hasn't quite been signed off, so I can be here with you. And it is fantastic to be here. I have to say, when I'm asked to come to an NFU event, I never actually imagine a venue quite like this. In my head, I've got sort of rolling fields in Yorkshire, or perhaps your farm, Minette, beautiful farm in beautiful countryside. But, you know, here we are in Birmingham. And you can take it from me that the local bullring isn't quite what you might think here in Birmingham. But as it happens, look, there are farms near here. Of course there are. This is Britain. Even in the most built-up part of our country, you're never far from a farm. I was on one this morning in Solihull with Rupert, an NFU member, naturally. And Minette, yes, I was wearing my boots and my bomber jacket on the farm, as I was when I came to your farm. It actually took me back, because it's a little known fact that my first job when I was about 14-year-old was on a farm, because I lived on the Surrey-Kent border. I have to say it wasn't a particularly sophisticated job. I was allocated to pick up stones in a field, for which I got about 50p. But it was a farm, and it was my first job. But I spoke to Rupert in Solihull on his farm this morning. He grows cereal crops and tends to a herd of beef. So he's got a mixed. And we chatted this morning, and amongst the things that he said to me, he told me, was that it sometimes feels like farmers aren't listened. And I thought about that, because I talk a lot about respect. Now, that's not something you can tax or regulate, but as a value that shapes how we see the world, how we feel about our country, I think it's really important. I saw this with my dad. He was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory all his life. And he always felt that people looked down on him, respected what he did. My sister's a care worker, as it happens. What she feels about the respect shown to her effort in the pandemic government, I'm not share with you. But, conference, my point is this. I obviously go round our country, and I know there's a feeling that politics doesn't respect. I know there's a sense that decisions which affect communities are taken miles away by people with little empathy for their challenges, that somehow politics is done to people, not with them. And I know this sentiment is especially strong when it comes to farming and the countryside. So let me start by acknowledging Labour's role in that. It's not deliberate. We do care deeply about the countryside.
So, we've got Sir Keir Starmer speaking to the National Farmers Union about issues on agriculture in the countryside. No reference to the situation on Northern Ireland, apart from those comments at the top, of course, where he was indicating he was expecting he may have had to have been in the Commons today to vote on a deal over Europe, which is actually an interesting aspect in itself. Let's break away from this speech in Birmingham to head back to Belfast, because our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is waiting there for us. And Darren, of course, the reason that we were just dipping in to listen to that speech is that Sir Keir Starmer has promised these votes to Rishi Sunak to get a deal through the Commons. Interesting there that Sir Keir Starmer indicating he felt that maybe he would have been in that seat in the Commons today to offer Labour votes to get a deal through.
Yeah, indeed. I think there is undoubtedly disappointment in Downing Street that the deal has not come today. The Prime Minister is not presenting it first to Cabinet this morning and then to the House of Commons this afternoon. Of course, Rishi Sunak would never want to rely on Labour votes to get that deal through. I think that would be at a point in which there would be a political crisis if he had to do so. But we're nowhere near that, by the way, yet. We're still waiting for any sense of a deal. And in fact, the sense is that it's not likely not just to come today, but indeed probably not this week, by the looks of things. Now, these things can change quite quickly. It could come tomorrow. I think the later we get in the week, the more we get onto the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. I think it's less likely the EU and the UK are somehow going to announce a deal then. What we've got at the moment, though, Mark, are kind of two tram tracks, if you like, of negotiations. We've got the EU-UK negotiations, which are going to continue this afternoon at 4 o'clock UK time. The Foreign Secretary is going to talk to the EU Commission about where they're at. Apparently intense negotiations, though we think the outline of a deal is already there. It's the reason that Rishi Sunak came to Belfast at the end of last week. But more importantly are these talks and the politics around trying to get the ERG, those kind of Brexiteers, the hardcore Brexiteers, if you like, inside the Conservative Party on board, and of course the DUP. Now the DUP at the moment are saying, you know what, yeah, progress seems to be made from what we've seen. We haven't seen a text though, but in theory, progress has been made, but not enough. And that is why the ERG are saying, well, if the DUP aren't quite signed up to it, we're not going to agree to it as well. All I would add is they're going to have a meeting later on in Westminster this evening, the ERG and the DUP. And also, we just must remind ourselves that while we do focus on the DUP an awful lot, Sinn Féin, actually, the next couple of minutes, are about to have a press conference right next to where I am. There are other parties here in Northern Ireland who, on the whole, are quite happy with the protocol and fundamentally just want to see government restored to Northern Ireland.
We're just getting a bit in from Dublin while we speak, Darren, which is the Irish Premier Leo Varadkar saying that time and space should be given to the UK government to allow for a possible agreement. He said, I can't say whether or not we'll have an agreement this week. I know that a huge amount of progress has been made by the European Commission and United Kingdom government in terms of coming to an agreement on the protocol. That was what he told reporters in Dublin a short time ago. So clearly the mood music is that, you know, there are efforts behind the scenes to get this through this week, maybe.
Yeah, I think there has been a massive change, really, from the EU Commission with, let's be frank about it, with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss not as Prime Minister. There is, I think, a sense in Dublin and Brussels that they feel they can work with Rishi Sunak. clearly the Prime Minister is keen for a deal to be made. Now, why do I say that? Because actually you listen to what the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, had to say. They're willing to give the UK government space and time to try and get their MPs and the DUP on board for a deal, but also a recognition from Dublin, which we hadn't heard before the last couple of months, that actually the way the protocol had initially been implemented, the reason, of course, Stormont's collapsed, was not working, and that in part the EU were to blame for that, and that is why they've come back to the negotiation table. So it is clear the EU have moved. The question, of course, is for the Conservative Party and indeed for the government whether they've moved far enough, and this is quite difficult for Rishi Sunak. You know, he's not got an awful lot of political authority, if we're honest. He wasn't elected by members, he wasn't elected by the public. He does need his MPs on board. He certainly could not afford for cabinet ministers to resign over this, and clearly, particularly the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is willing to make it clear that he's going to speak out on this issue. So it is very tricky politically, and that is why I think the government have kind of stepped back a little bit this week and are trying to convince MPs. Rishi Sunak was in Parliament yesterday talking to lots of them, trying to get them on board. And instrumental, by the way, in all of this, Mark, will be the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, and one of the most senior Northern Ireland ministers here in the NIO, which is Steve Baker, two, of course, former heads of the ERG, two really strong Brexiteers, who I'm sure will be making the case to those other MPs on Rishi Sunak's behalf.
Yeah, and Steve Baker perhaps indicating he's a bit miffed that he's not been kept up to date with what's going on. But we shall see what emerges from those video conference calls. Darren, for the moment in Belfast, thank you for that. But let's now bring in John Laverty, Executive Editor of the Belfast Telegraph. And John, just on that aspect of keeping everyone informed, it's interesting that the Prime Minister's spokesman in Downing Street, speaking to reporters after the Cabinet meeting, asked why the Prime Minister had not updated members of the DUP and the ERG, of course, in London about the negotiations earlier. Is there an indication, perhaps, that things are going on behind the scenes and that we may have something agreed by the end of this week?
Things are going on behind the scenes, Mark, but I honestly cannot see anything happening in the immediate future. There's, as you know, there's a Zoom meeting later on between James Cleverly and Chris Heaton-Harris and Maro Sefcovic. Yeah. And then after that, there's meant to be a physical meeting maybe later this week, but nothing is imminent. I mean, the mood music has changed immensely over the last weekend. Since Rishi Sunak came to Belfast last week with hopes high, things have gone really flat since then. I mean, I think the DUP have looked towards their people and things got rather pessimistic outcome, and then of course on the other side of there you see Rishi Sunak and the ERG at loggerheads over this as well. So in many ways, Mark, signing the deal is the easy bit. Selling it to the DUP and the ERG is going to be the most difficult thing, because everyone knows what the deal is. The deal is going to be red lanes and green lanes. You know, but there is still going to be the European Court of Justice involved, and that is very much a red line for both the ERG and the DUP.
Yeah, no support for any deal that retains the oversight of the European Court of Justice, because that's what we were hearing from particularly the DUP with Sammy Wilson. But what did you make of this report in the Times, London Times, back at the weekend, that Rishi Sunak was willing to go ahead with the UK-EU Accord, as it was called, even without DUP support? I mean, a lot of people scratching their heads as to how that would work if he went for broke, as it were.
Well, Rishi Sunak, the feeling over here is that Rishi Sunak has been bending over backwards for the DUP. One of the problems here, Mark, is in Northern Ireland is that people seem to think. I mean, I heard Penny Mordaunt at the weekend talking about. She talked about the people of Northern Ireland. I think what she really meant was the DUP voters, because the people of Northern Ireland aren't exactly in lockstep with everybody in the DUP. So and I think Rishi Sunak was taken aback last week as well by the DUP. Not only when they were lukewarm towards it, I think, but since then, senior members of their party have added a red line that the NI protocol bill must go through for this deal to be accepted by them. Now, that was never mentioned before in their list of red lines, and here it is now. So there's a long way to go. I mean, as I say, signing the deal is easy, but
yeah, and an indication on that, of course, where we had in the last few minutes, Keir Starmer speaking to these farmers in Birmingham, indicating perhaps he thought he was going to be in the Commons today, getting those votes to sign everything off. But just to look at the bigger picture, I mean, we've got this, just to sort of indicate how fevered things are. Brandon Lewis, a former Northern Ireland secretary, talking about, a reform, an architectural reform, as he called it, of the Good Friday Agreement 25 years on, bearing in mind the change in the electoral position of everyone there in Northern Ireland, in particular the Alliance Party.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that. I don't think he got it. Brandon Lewis got everything exactly right there, because he mentioned something about the Alliance Party could not hold the first ministership if they became the main party. That's not actually true. I mean, they could actually do that, but the Good Friday Agreement is not going to be touched. Everything that's being done, everything that's been negotiated here, has to be negotiated around the Good Friday Agreement. Now, but the thing about some home truths have to be brought in here. The protocol's not going anywhere. The DUP don't want amendments to the protocol. They want it scrapped. It's not going to be scrapped. It's the inevitable outworkings of the Brexit that Boris Johnson brought to the UK. And now, of course, ironically, he's the man who's saber rattling against with the ERG and against Rishi Sunak. This is opportunism from Boris Johnson, and it's a spanner in the works as well. But there won't be a deal this week, as far as I mean, there may not be a deal this month.
Yeah, and we reflect on Michael Martin saying, don't play politics with this. It's too important. But we shall see what emerges from the Zoom calls this afternoon and that ERG meeting. But for the moment, John, thank you very much for joining us, Executive Editor there at the Belfast Telegraph. Thanks. Update you, of course, as we get more on those various moves. But let's now reflect on the media watchdog Ofcom saying it is extremely concerned after Nicola Bulley's family revealed that they'd been contacted by two broadcasters after her body had been discovered when they had expressly asked for privacy. Well, questions remain about the case, with both police and media facing criticism after her body was discovered in the River Wyre more than 3 weeks after disappearing. Well, Lancashire Police called a news conference yesterday. The force not addressing the widespread criticism, of course, it's received for releasing some aspects of her private life into the public domain. Police also not disclosing why it had taken 23 days to actually find her body after those several searches had taken place. Well, let's get the latest now with our reporter, Thea Chikombo, who's been following the story in Lancashire today. And Thea, clearly it's moving on now from the search and the investigation going on to the way that the media and indeed the police handled things.
That's right. Yes, of course, after yesterday's press conference, the Lancashire Police officially announcing that they were formally announcing that they found the body of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley. And of course, there are questions now about how the police handled communications throughout this period, how they handled their investigations. It took over 3 weeks and she was found in the River Wyre, just less than a mile from where I am now. And of course, over the next few weeks, reviews we understand are taking place into how the police conducted themselves during this time. And in the last hour, we have heard that the media regulator, Ofcom, have got in touch with broadcasters ITV and Sky about how they conducted themselves on Sunday, just a few days ago, when the police said that they had been contacted by someone who'd seen a body in the river. And in between that time, when we were waiting for official confirmation, we understand they got in touch directly with the family when they had indeed asked for privacy. Of course, it's a difficult terrain these days, particularly with social media as well, alongside traditional media, people coming here, filming on their phones, uploading to social media platforms, which fueled some speculation, which Lancashire Police had said people should refrain from doing so that it doesn't cause distress on the family. So many questions to be answered over the next couple of weeks and months indeed. But of course, this is a moment the family, friends and relatives as well are grieving the loss of mother of two, Nicola Bulley, here in Lancashire.
Indeed. Theo, thank you very much for updating us at the scene. And, of course, we'll see what the reaction is to those Ofcom comments to those broadcasters, ITV and Sky News. Let's actually reflect that we've got more coming up on what's happening north of the border with the SNP leadership race. Who is in, who is out of some controversial comments. First, let's update you on the latest on the weather.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back. Let's update you with the dramatic political developments north of the border, with SNP leadership contender Kate Forbes denying that her campaign had been derailed following her comments on gay marriage. But three key backers have announced they can no longer support her, the Finance Secretary, because she said she would have voted against legislation on same-sex unions and marriages. 2014, of course, that vote took place, also saying that she would not have voted for the Scottish Government's gender reform bill in its current form. Well, she's one of three confirmed candidates in the contest alongside Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan. Let's get more with our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, who's been following these developments from Holyrood. And this is the rub, I guess, Tony, that she's got three senior backers that jumped ship really very quickly after this.
Yes, certainly. Today, of course, in Holyrood behind me here, it was supposed to be a day to agree the budget for Scotland, touted as the greenest budget in living memory, as well as being a real distribution of wealth from, you know, Scotland's richest to Scotland's poorest. Instead, we've been dragged into yet another SNP day of drama. So Kate Forbes, according to former Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson, has just set fire to her leadership campaign on the very same day that she started it. She, of course, did say that in an interview last night, repeated again today, numerous times I might add, that she would have opposed the same-sex marriage bill passed in 2014. And later today with Sky News, she had told them that it was wrong for children to be born outside of marriage. This does not seem like a sensible way to be digging themselves out of a hole. Certainly, and those supporters that you mentioned, Richard Lockhead, Minister for a Just Transition, he had supported Kate Forbes earlier in the day yesterday, and then obviously after last night said that he agreed we cannot have a party leader who would vote against same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
Same for Tom Arthur, who's MP for Renfrewshire South. The list goes on.
I mean, she has said she regretted the pain and hurt caused by her comments, but of course she did make it clear that this was an issue of conscience for her because she's a member of the Free Church of Scotland. So, it is a sort of core belief perhaps for her. But it's intriguing then that Hamza Yousaf, who many may think now is the front runner, of course he'd promised to stand by this controversial gender recognition reform bill and challenge Section 35, which many think is what's done for Nicola Sturgeon. So we've got quite an intriguing political and religious situation developing, if you like.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of commentators have actually said that, if we're not careful, this debate could take quite a dark turn into at what point does politicians hold levels of high-state jobs while being, involved with religion. Now, certainly, I don't think anyone would argue that somebody of a religion couldn't hold a high-level job. But it's at what point does that come and influence policy? Certainly just on the GRR that you said there, certainly Forbes and Ash Regan, one of the other candidates for the role of SNP leader and First Minister for Scotland, they both signed a letter to Nicola Sturgeon in the first phase of this bill, outlining their disappointment that this was going forward. Ash Regan famously left her role in the government as a result. So I think whether we like it or not, this religion issue is now going to be at the centre of this campaign. Kate Forbes has said it's not going to impact her, but that's about four backers that she's lost in the last 24 hours. If I may just turn to David Linden MP, he tweeted earlier today that he was preparing to fast for Lent, obviously being Shrove Tuesday today, and he said, there's a whole piece I could write in my views regarding separation of faith and the state, but my immediate concern is that folk, especially my LGBT friends and colleagues, know that the central tenet of Christianity is love, and certainly I think then he is also showing that there are some clear fall-away point here where there may be an opportunity for Kate Forbes to get back on track with this campaign.
Oh, interesting point. Tony, thank you for that. Of course, more developments to come, and we'll follow the trials and tribulations of all those candidates there for the First Minister position. Coming up, why Harry and Meghan aren't very happy with South Park. But will the last laugh be on them? First, an update on all the news headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. It's 2:33. The media regulator says it's extremely concerned by the actions of two broadcasters following comments made by Nicola Bulley's family. Both ITV and Sky contacted the 45-year-old's relatives after her body was discovered in the River Wire on Sunday, despite an appeal for privacy. Ofcom has written to both companies asking them to explain their actions. A former Conservative MP jailed for sexually assaulting a teenager has been freed from prison after serving half his term. Imran Ahmed Khan was jailed for 18 months last May for groping a 15-year-old boy after a party in 2008. The 49-year-old lost a Court of Appeal challenge against his conviction and sentence in December. Russia has issued a warning to the West by suspending its participation in a nuclear arms treaty with the US. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major speech on the war in Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it describes as an aggressive course set by Washington. The Foreign and Northern Ireland secretaries will hold fresh talks with the EU this afternoon on the protocol. Earlier, the Prime Minister told Cabinet intensive negotiations are continuing in a bid to resolve the outstanding issues. Rishi Sunak says three main areas are being addressed: safeguarding Northern Ireland's place within the Union, protecting the Belfast Agreement and ensuring the free flow of trade. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to...
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We're just, of course, updating you on Sir Keir Starmer speaking to farmers at the NFU in Birmingham. Well, they're being promised a closer trading relationship with Europe by Sir Keir Starmer. He'd accused the Conservatives of giving up on them. A Labour leader making his pitch to those rural voters in the speech. Also set to offer more community support officers and police in the countryside, he said. Meanwhile, the government, the promise of £168 million in grants for farmers to boost innovation, increase productivity and support welfare. Let's get more with our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson, who's at the NFU annual conference in Birmingham. So it looks as if the farm vote is important to both sides.
That's exactly right, Mark. Keir Starmer, near the start of his speech, mentioning that the Labour Party in the past has come across too much as the party for urban Britain, and that he was trying to rebuild the Labour Party from top to bottom in order to represent all of the communities around the country. He mentioned of going to a farm in Solihull and speaking to that farmer and emphasising with the room how important farming was, and particularly domestic production was. And that's where some of the commitments that he's made at this conference today start to kind of come in, renegotiating or negotiating a deal with the European Union on farming to remove some of the barriers that the NFU members of here have been saying that they're facing. Also committing £1.2 billion of public money to be spent on actual, British produced food, with 50% just the minimum of all public sector food is going to be produced locally and sustainably. So that's much of his commitment to farmers. And as you mentioned, he was saying that it's been obvious for a long time that the Tories have given up on farmers, and so he's here at this conference to try and get them back on side.
Yeah, and it's interesting, of course, in his opening remarks, where he was saying that he'd expected perhaps to be in the Commons today to vote on a deal in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, a European deal. But clearly he is intimating that Labour will want a closer relationship with Europe, particularly on this issue of agriculture.
Yeah, that's right. He kind of mentioned that communities controlling a lot of their economic destiny, he called it, is a big focus for him and his party, and so negotiating with the European Union in order to give those communities greater economic freedom and make it easier to trade with their partners around Europe, but also wary, of course, of those trade deals that the government is negotiating with Australia and New Zealand, who, of course, we know are big agriculture exporters. That's some of the concerns that the NFU particularly have been raising here today, as well as the state of British farming, with the price of fertiliser up 169%, energy up 79%, and the fact that last year 1 billion less eggs were produced in the UK compared to 2019, the lowest levels that we've seen here for egg production since 2009. So Keir Starmer trying to reassure the room that if Labour were to get into government, they would back British farmers and back food sustainability here in the UK.
Yeah, because we saw some of the rationing, of course, at supermarkets on those eggs, we remember, and suggestions even at the moment that fruit and veg is being rationed by some stores as well. And just finally, Jack, I mean, what was the response? What sort of welcome did he get?
Well, it seemed to be quite a positive reaction, because not just with Keir Starmer, but also with Conservative Minister Mark Spencer, who was here earlier, who announced the introduction of a grant scheme for farmers to be able to apply for grants to increase their productivity, create and invest in more environmentally friendly equipment. The NFU conference here seemed to be quite pleased with both parties. So the jury here is still out which party maybe they favour more and trust more to back British farming if they're in government.
Jack, at Birmingham at the NFU conference, thanks very much indeed for updating us there. Now, let's return to what we've been hearing from the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, in Moscow a little earlier, speaking for more than 2 hours about Ukraine in that State of the Union address, blaming the West for escalating and even provoking the war, saying the United States and allies had sought limitless power. Well, the speech coming ahead of the first anniversary, of course, of that invasion on Friday. Speculation that Russia could be launching a fresh spring offensive. Well, Putin said he'd suspended Russia's participation in the only remaining nuclear treaty with the United States.
In the beginning of February this year, there was a statement from NATO factually demanding that Russia returns to the Strategic Arms Treaty, as they call it, including allowing inspections of our nuclear defence facilities. I don't even know what to call it. It's a theatre of the absurd. They can't be silly people. They want to deliver us a strategical defeat while crawling into our strategic nuclear objects. Regarding this, I have to say that Russia suspends its participation in New START treaty. Let me repeat, Russia does not abandon the treaty, but suspends its participation. Before resuming the discussion of this treaty, we must first understand what do such countries of NATO, like France and Great Britain, aspire to do, and how will we take their strategic arsenals into account.
Well, the Russian president going on to say that Western sanctions had failed to affect or ruin Russia's economy and had backfired, in his view.
The West has turned against Russia not only a military and information force, but also an economic one. But it has not achieved its goals anywhere, and it will not. Those who initiated the sanctions against Russia have punished themselves, caused price increases, business closures, and an energy crisis in their countries. And they tell their own citizens, and we hear that the Russians are to blame for everything.
Well, in response to that, United States indicating that they believed that the Russian president was delusional, and indeed we'll be hearing from President Biden. He's due to hold his own speech in Warsaw in Poland at about 4:30 London time. More reaction, of course, to that as it comes through. But staying with international news now is another deadly earthquake that's hit Turkey near the border with Syria, leaving rescuers to search for survivors trapped under yet more rubble. At least 6 people, we're being told, killed so far by the recent 6.4 magnitude tremor striking near the city of Antakya. Well, the quake's already hitting the country, as you remember, on 6th of February, killing some 44,000 people and leaving tens of thousands of others without shelter or homes. Let's get more with Shahid Rahman, founder of Global Relief Trust, and he's moving to the border with Syria to help refugees there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. What's the picture you're getting on the ground? Because clearly a lot of the buildings that were perhaps damaged initially would have been hit by this latest quake.
Well, Afad, the Emergency Management Authority of Turkey, they've now said that 28 buildings have now collapsed from the previous earthquake. And we are effortlessly trying to help the needy people on the ground by providing food, sanitation, blankets and stuff like that. You could imagine it's just one after the other at the moment.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of people had taken the decision to stay out in the open and not risk staying in buildings and sleeping in cars or tents. But I gather that's brought its own problems, as you're saying, with water and sanitation, with all these reports of cholera hitting particularly young children as well.
Yeah, so we've come on the ground with some paramedics ourselves. We've been here for the last 2-3 days now. We were there 2 weeks ago, and we're back again. The UK team is back again. That is horrible now. We're getting children who have got flu, fevers, and stuff like that now. So we desperately need some medical support on the ground.
And where are you hoping that comes from? Because obviously a lot of reports within Syria are saying that their medical services in many of the areas in the north are simply non-existent.
This is where the international community comes in. Like I said, a great admiration to the UK public for supporting teams like us and other NGOs that are on the ground. But we desperately need that support now. We need medical staff, medical trained staff to come on the ground and maybe support and get the stuff in. The Turkish authorities are keeping the borders open as much as possible. We are going in through Kilis, which is the northern part of Syria, into Turkey's held areas, where we are providing these medical aid at the moment.
And are there still these so-called no-go areas because of the political situation and, of course, the warfare that's taking place, that it's simply just too dangerous to go into?
There are no-go areas, but it's all depending on how the Turkish authority are going to be helping people get through or letting people in to Turkey. Yeah. So that might be another option which they are deciding on.
And clearly, as you said, the British public have reacted as normal with compassion and help. But what's actually needed on the ground? I mean, is it better for them to supply the various charities and groups with money so they can buy the kit on the ground? Because clearly, if you get things like clothing and blankets, they've got to be moved physically by road to get to these places.
Yeah, time is of the essence. As you know, in earthquakes like this and situations like this, time is definitely of the essence. We definitely need cash donation, organizations like us and other people who are working inside Syria, where we can buy the items on the ground. It's a lot more easier. We could provide them. Like I said yesterday, we provided over 400 mattresses and blankets to people who've moved from Antakya all the way down to Adana, which is about 300 miles away. People are scattered everywhere. Yeah. It's nice to see the spirits are high. The local schools are open now, and they're providing shelter for people. It's just like Atik mentioned 2 weeks ago. It's like Armageddon.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I mean, not just the physical aspect of shelter and food and water and so on. I mean, how have people been affected? Because, I mean, now, obviously, they're just actually assessing what's happened to their friends and family and their way of life.
Well, I could tell you, I spoke to a guy called Abdullah, about a 60-year-old man who lived in Damascus all his life. 12 years ago, he moved from Damascus to Idlib and from Idlib into Antakya. And now he says to me, I've become a refugee in 12 years 3 times. So you could imagine the lifestyle and what kind of situation these people are facing.
Yeah, and all the time thinking what comes next with, of course, these latest tremors to hit. But Shahid, thank you very much indeed for updating us. And, of course, we wish you well with your continuing operations, as you said, there in Kilis in Turkey. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much indeed.
And, of course, we'll update you as we get more news with where your aid donations and efforts are going as well. But let's reflect on other matters now with what's been happening in terms of the royal family. The Princess of Wales visiting a care home in Slough. But attention also focused, yes, inevitably, on the Sussexes and what might happen after South Park. Last week, the television cartoon airing this controversial episode, mocking or lampooning the royal couple, loudly begging for privacy on a worldwide tour and drawing attention to themselves. The couple lampooned on that worldwide privacy tour, promoting the prince's new book titled Wah! Thought to be, yes, a little jab, or a big jab maybe, at Harry's recent memoir, Spare. No denying the couple have a history of taking legal action, of course. So the wider question, will they actually take the creators of South Park to court now? Joining us is royal commentator Michael Cole. Michael, thank you for joining us. We'll break away from the cartoon, which maybe a lot of people are just enjoying without the sound on. I mean, it's quite quite vicious in a way, but quite funny as well.
Absolutely, that's the essence of satire, and there's of course more than a grain of truth in it. I think there's been a sense of humor failure on that hilltop at Montecito in California, but I think they're going to be up against it if they're going to try and sue for libel in America, because, as you know, equally as well as I do, the libel laws in America are very, very elastic, unlike this country, and I think they'd actually be setting a legal precedent if they managed to get any damages out of this company from what is, after all, a rather justifiable bit of fun at their expense, going around the world and publicising themselves while asking for more and more privacy.
Interesting, too, that the makers of South Park have touched on the public mood, maybe, in that, you know, growing not just frustration, but perhaps the fact that the American public have sort of grown exasperated with what's been going on.
America always wants the next thing, and I think they're a little bit old hat now, and I think it's out of the spirit of the times. You alluded to it. The Americans are very litigious, as we know. They sue if their coffee's not hot enough, and they sue if their coffee is too hot. And I think 1 in 10 people in gainful employment is a lawyer in America. And it's a bit of a sort of participation sport over there. But it doesn't sit well among these two very privileged, well-paid people sitting in their isolation in their little fortress, firing out these bullets to the rest of the world. They should be hugging themselves with happiness. They're beautiful, good-looking people. They have some lovely, healthy children. They've got everything that money can buy, and fame, and a certain amount of adoration, which is diminishing by the day, I fear. They should be absolutely adoring themselves, and they should follow the example of Harry's brother and his wife, who are setting such a brilliant example. I think we saw the other night at the BAFTAs. I mean, the new Princess of Wales could hardly look better. She's long been a high street fashion person, which is very good for British designers, manufacturers and retailing. But last night she wowed them not Sunday night, wasn't it? She wowed them on the red carpet, equally as glamorous as any of the actresses who were there. And she was wearing a beautiful designer dress, which she'd worn before, you know, recycling a little bit from Alexander McQueen, very long opera gloves, and a pair of 1799 earrings, and she looked stunning. Of course,
Well observed, I was going to say. You've obviously been taking notes. Just to reflect, I mean, the Princess of Wales are actually, I think, flipping pancakes at a care home today, keeping calm and carrying on. But last thought, Michael, what of the coronation and what of the Sussexes, do you think?
Well, I tell you what, I think the King has played an absolute blinder here because he made it clear from the very start that they were invited. His younger son and his wife, Meghan, were invited. So it's very much up to them, Mark, whether they come or not. And if they decline, if they refuse, it would look rather petty and perhaps mean-spirited. And if they accept, it will leave them open to the charge of hypocrisy because they've been slagging off the institution of monarchy and knocking everybody conceivably as part of it, their closest relations. And if they do turn up, well, I think those are saying, well, what was all that about if you can come round for the great occasions? But you and I know there's never been a great family occasion where there hasn't been a slight row about something.
Indeed. We shall wait and see what emerges and, of course, what the courts may decide or otherwise in terms of the cartoon. Michael, as ever, thank you for your time here on GB News. Great to speak to you once more. And, of course, no doubt Michael will be with us here for that coronation coverage as well. Plenty of your views coming in on what we've been telling you of the day, particularly on the SNP. Colin, what a shame a leadership challenger tells the truth and is being criticised. William, are we seriously suggesting Kate Forbes' initial backers did not know her views on moral matters? She's never hid her position. Could this be shifty political games by SNP politicians? Well, on the war in Ukraine, Phil, I would be the last person to defend Russia's action in Ukraine, but I'm not falling for the wailing and hair-pulling by Western leaders. Keep the views coming. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Patrick up with you next. We're back tomorrow as ever at 12. Weather details for you now.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Bit of rain around tomorrow, haven't seen much of that so far this month. Some spots will brighten up. I think we'll all notice a colder feel. At the moment, very mild between these two weather fronts, but here comes a cold front. Overnight and tomorrow, that pushes across the country and introduces chillier weather. It's not going to be especially cold, but as I say, you will notice the difference. It's also going to bring some rain this evening into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That cold front will then spread some rain into western parts of England and across Wales during the early hours. A few showers are possible across the east, particularly the southeast, but many eastern parts of England will stay dry. It'll be a mild one for most as well, but as that cold front clears late in the night, we could get down to 2 or 3 in the northwest, so that colder weather is moving in. And certainly a chillier feel tomorrow. A bit of a grey, damp start, certainly for most of England and Wales. The rain's going to be kind of patchy in places, but it's going to linger on and off across eastern England well into the afternoon. A few showers will come into North Wales, the Midlands and northern Scotland, where there will be snow on the hills. But we should see some brighter skies for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England through the afternoon. Look at the temperatures. We've been into the teens over recent days, 10 at best tomorrow, most places 7 or 8. About average for the time of year. But as I said, it will feel colder than it has done. Now, the rain doesn't really clear from East Anglia and the southeast, so it stays pretty damp here, even into Thursday morning. But where we do see clear skies with the colder air in place, we are going to see much more of a frost on Thursday morning, certainly in the countryside over northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Not frosty in the south